3 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I suppose we should start with the mea culpa, shouldn't we? We'd start with the reasons why we didn't do more on it. And I think I know why. I read Private Eye religiously every fortnight. I'm a subscriber, so it drops through my letterbox in a plain white envelope. And few things bring me more of a frisson of anticipation than the arrival of what is, pound for pound, by far the finest journalistic outlet in this country. Also, it's largely free of comment journalism. It's basically jokes and revelations. Jokes, revelations, and Mickey takes. There's a little bit of comment in there, of course there is. But if you look at your average organ these days, I suppose with the exception of the Economist, it's wall-to-wall opinion. It's slightly odd position for me to take, given that my job is basically offering you my opinions every morning and canvassing yours. But in terms of the sort of wider vista of media outlets, in the course of our lives, the segue, the shift from being largely news-led and news-driven, which is expensive, it's expensive to do news, to being opinion-led and opinion-driven, is quite spectacular. It's one of those things you don't really notice until you take a moment to step back from the fray and just consider how much things have changed. Younger people, looking at a young colleague now, will be unaware of the days when the news agenda was dominated by news rather than by opinions, rather than by arguments, everywhere from the BBC onwards. It essentially books people to have an argument these days. Entire television stations have been founded based upon putting forward one side of an argument and doing their level best to stifle the other. What would have been the mode or the format of the radio phone-in has now essentially, partly because it's cheap, has now essentially, in the context of newspapers and television, has become the sort of central platform of most media coverage. It's part of the reason why we spend so much of our lives at each other's throats, isn't it? And Private Eye manages to somehow rise above that fray, and it does extraordinary investigations. We've invited Private Eye journalists into the studio. Richard Brooks's work on the PPE contracts preceded much bigger coverage elsewhere. And I've always struggled, really, with the idea of why it doesn't have a louder voice, as it were, because it does hundreds of thousands of copies per issue. It's I think the most successful magazine in the country. It's certainly up there. And it does stories like the post office scandal, the postmaster, the sub-postmaster scandal, in incredible detail. And it does something that most media doesn't do. It stays with stuff for months or years. When the late, great Paul Foote was on the paper, was on Private Eye, they just refused to let go. Talk about a dog with a bone. That's the kind of journalism that I don't think, really, with a couple of glorious single-issue exceptions, it does the kind of journalism that doesn't really happen anymore. It used to be normal. Insight Team at the Sunday Times. Used to be normal to put journalists on a story for months without any guarantee that they'd get on the telly or get into the actual paper. Dull, grinding work sometimes in pursuit of detail, scandal and revelation. And so I remember reading about the post office scandal, and I think we had one go at doing it, but we didn't get the calls, so you can't go back to it. We're a little bit limited on this programme with what we can do. In retrospect, huge mistake. Reading these stories about people having their lives turned upside down because they were held responsible for errors made by a computer program, and the point at which so many people were being prosecuted and criminalised and jailed, and yet the post office's position was still that the individuals were to blame, that there was a sort of familial fraud. There was a culture of fraud among sub-postmasters that was robbing the country blind for decades. And the attitude the post office took to it, and their political masters took to it, was that it's not remotely anomalous, it's not remotely shocking, it's not remotely surprising that hundreds, if not, thousands of people have all been found to have been ripping the post office off for years, while they all insist to the prison gates. They insist that they have done nothing wrong and that it must be the technology. More than 700 sub-postmasters were convicted between 1999 and 2015. An accounting system called Horizon made it seem as though money was missing from their businesses. Of those 700, only 93 convictions have been overturned. If it wasn't for a man called Alan Bates, one of the lead claimants and a representative of the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, it's possible that none of this would have seen the light of day, that the victims would still have their plight unregarded, unreported. Rishi Sunak has suggested exonerating all of the convicted parties. 60 or 70 of them, I have to tell you, have died so far. And you also have partners, husbands, wives who are ill or dying, as well as the individuals involved. It's been going on for years, he says, and it shouldn't be allowed. Now, the extraordinary thing about this, and I've offered up my own inadequate apology, the reason why we didn't do it more, despite the fact that I was reading Private Eye regularly, was that it doesn't work as a phone-in. If these people, particularly if they've been prosecuted, or they are being prosecuted, are not allowed to talk to me. But why the story, and it was taken up, I mean, I think Radio 4 did something on it, belatedly, but I don't have the capacity, really, to explain to you why something so huge, and you can tell how huge it is, and you can tell how impactful it is by the response in the last week to the drama starring Toby Jones and Julie Hesmond-Helch and the accompanying documentary. I mean, it's actually almost unbelievable. And as Alan Bates says, it shouldn't be allowed. And it took the drama to exert the political pressure. Former Post Office chief executive called Paula Vanells remains a CBE, a commander of the British Empire. An enormous petition is in place to strip her of her title. The Justice Secretary is now looking at the things that were described to the Prime Minister on the telly yesterday. And he added, the Prime Minister added, it's right that we find every which way we can to try and make this right for the people who were so wrongfully treated at the time. He also said something about it all happened in the 1990s when, as anybody who's been paying the vaguest bit of attention would know, that this was actually happening right up until 2015. The convictions themselves didn't start until 1999. So Sunak once again demonstrating that he's just not very good at politics. One former postmaster, speaking yesterday to the BBC, described being pursued through the courts, paying hundreds of thousands of pounds, and then went bankrupt. The victims, he said, are traumatised. It's been a long time, 25 years, £135 million has been paid to some of the victims, but we've had £150 million plus paid to lawyers. And this is the point, I think, that perhaps lies at the heart of the problem. We are just normal, run-of-the-mill people. We have legal people with us, but it is so difficult, and it is like a war. Those are the words of Lee Castleton, former postmaster, victim of the scandal. While most of your newspapers were busy shouting about refugees or Brussels or, I don't know, single mothers or unemployed people, sub-postmasters up and down the country were being criminalised in quite extraordinarily awful ways. The great Post Office trial on Radio 4 touched on this, but didn't get anything like the movement that this ITV drama has received. And as I say, Private Eye has been banging this drum with incredible accuracy and indefatigability for pretty much the entire period of time under discussion. So you now know the facts, whether you've watched the drama or not, whether you're across all of the details or not, doesn't really matter. You have a scandal affecting hundreds of people, a dodgy accounting system made by Fujitsu was responsible for creating the illusion that hundreds of sub-postmasters had been stealing money from the post office. And while they all screamed their innocence to the prison gates, they were all ignored. You live in this country. You were living in this country when this happened. You are living in this country as this unfolds. Just take a moment this morning to explain to me why you think... There's also a journalist called Nick Wallace who I think we have spoken to on the programme, who has been pursuing this with extraordinary rigour and vigour. But until it became an ITV drama, the needle barely moved. And that's what I want you to talk to me about. Because, I mean, I do this for a living. I talk about stuff in the news. I make decisions every day on what's likely to engage you and what matters. I can't quite get my head around the fact that it took a drama. It took a dramatisation of a fairly well-reported scandal, albeit not reported with the same vigour that some news outlets report, I don't know, parking tickets, e-bikes and whatever the flavour of the day story is to wind you up. It was fairly well reported in grown-up media, and yet it has barely impacted at all, more broadly, until ITV made a drama about it. And that's all I'm going to ask you. And I want you to tell me why. How did this happen, in your view? You don't have to be remotely connected to the story. You just need to understand what television is and what a false conviction is. How? How did this happen? And obviously, if you've got skin in the game, if you or someone you care for or know was caught up in this horrible, horrible story, a word on what it was actually like would be fascinating, would be worth its weight in gold. I would very much welcome that. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Remember, Rishi Sunak, as someone's just pointed out in a text that I don't think is signed, Rishi Sunak was jumping up and down to get involved in Nigel Farage's banking arrangements. But on this, he said absolutely nothing until ITV turned it into a drama. Just use that as a way into it, if you would. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is more concerned about the personal banking arrangements of the most stubborn skid mark on the underpants of British politics than he is about 700 honest tax-paying workers being criminalised, prosecuted and traumatised for crimes they did not commit. And he doesn't get his finger out until it becomes a drama on ITV. So there are questions for the media to answer. But the Tories have been in power since 2010. The convictions and the unfolding scandal has been unfolding for the duration of that period. What was it like to be involved? And crucially, how do you explain this to yourself, never mind to me? How do you account for the fact that until it was a drama on ITV in the week after Christmas, nobody really cared? 0345 6060 973. You know, you send me stuff, and I sometimes think I better just check that. I can't just read that out cold on the radio. But it's true. I'll just read you this. Another prolific donor, Simon Blagden, was made a member of the UK HSA Advisory Board in April. That's a sort of health service position. Since 2005, Blagden and companies he is associated with have donated £376,000 to the Conservatives. These include Pietis Limited, a firm he was director of from 2000 to 2020, and Avray Partnership Limited, which he has been a director of since 2014. He was also a chairman of Fujitsu UK, which sued the NHS over a failed IT project. A parliamentary committee's inquiry into the debacle in 2013 cited reports that a sum of £700 million was sought from the Department of Health. And I don't know what his involvement is or was with Fujitsu and regard to the Horizon accounting scheme, but it was faults within that accounting system that made it seem as though money was missing from post office businesses when it was not. So when Fujitsu were unhappy with the NHS over the failed implementation of an IT system, they sue for a reported £700 million. When Fujitsu are responsible for a faulty accounting system that leaves 700 sub-postmasters convicted of crimes they did not commit, well, there's a lot of them still waiting for the money. Funny old world, isn't it? 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Richard is in Chelmsford. Richard, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. My daughter was involved in this. She ran a sub-post office in a North Essex village. I'm not going to name it because she still gets a lot of hassle from it. And every week she was short on money. Right. Never went the other way. It was always short on money. To one point, she actually ran the post herself for the whole week because she thought it was staff taking money. And she watched that programme last week, and she said, that was me, Dad. Yeah. I was on the floor going through all the paperwork and could never make it add up.
Starting when, Richard, roughly? Can you remember?
Oh, no, I can't, to be honest.
Mate, don't worry. It's not exactly Frost Nixon, is it, so far, this exchange? I can't remember either. But God, the point being that she knew something was up and she knew it wasn't her, but she didn't know what it was.
No, and she'd phone them up, she'd phone the helpline, and she'd get told she's the only one. And but what they did, they put the money in themselves, so they never got convicted because their money was always correct.
So she made up the shortfall?
She made up the shortfall out of the profits from the shop, because it was also a shop, and her husband's wages. And in the end, they closed the post office, and that's when they got a lot of abuse from the villagers, because they said, why are you closing it? And even up to this day, somebody said to her last week in the local co-op, went up to her and said, did you see that programme? Shame you wasn't caught up in that.
Meaning that they wanted her to have more trouble in her life?
Yes, they wanted her to keep the post office open so they could go in there and buy a pint of milk or paper every week. But
this is extraordinary, isn't it? And her story has not been told. Well, her personal story specifically has not been told. But the experiences that she underwent, and I think crucially, and I've heard this a few times now, while being told by the post office that she was the only one, it wasn't happening anywhere else, when they must have known that it was, not least because 700 convictions ensued. Yeah. That's the bit I don't get, Richard. That's the bit where I can't see the spark jumping from one plug to the next one. When that number didn't make anyone at the post office think the problem might be at their end.
No, that's right. And she got some compensation about a year ago, but she had to sign a non-disclosure agreement not to talk about it.
Okay.
Even then, that last year.
And that is going to be part of this as well. So you and I both, I suspect, have a sense that for all the revelations and all the impacts of this ITV drama in the accompanying documentary, there's a lot still to come out.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Why do you think, how do you account for it? Because you know your daughter, you know she's not as honest as the day is long. You knew that this was not right or fair, but did they just keep a lid on it themselves? They just quietly paid it off themselves, closed down the post office counter because they couldn't afford to keep subsidising the accounting errors, and probably didn't even come to Dad with it that much, because that's not how most people are made.
They do always used to say to me, we haven't got any money.
Yeah.
And we closed the post office, and because the villagers then got an order on it, to keep a shop in the village, we opened it as an off licence and run that like that for 3 or 4 years, and then closed it when the council took the order off.
It is so there. I mean, that's the perfect first call in a way. I'm sorry that your daughter, your family had to go through what they've been through to prove it, but this is not contained within, albeit that she's now received compensation. She didn't end up in court because she was paying it off from her own. I wonder how many more sub-postmasters were paying off the shortfall from their own income, from their own taxed income, in order to keep the problem at bay. That must be so strange. Goodness knows how many people are doing their tax returns at the moment. You know how complicated it can be and how difficult sometimes. But when the two columns just simply don't tally, you've done everything that's come in, and the numbers that you're being told should have come in is considerably higher than the number that has. Why has it taken an ITV drama for this to capture the imagination of the nation? 25 minutes after 10. And why does Rishi Sunak care more about Nigel Farage's personal banking accounts than he does about 700 wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters? It's funny, that. Don't forget he was Chancellor before he was Prime Minister. Shailesh is in Purley. Shailesh, what can you tell us?
Hi, James. I've been listening to your programme for many, many years. Great programme.
And now here you are, finally on it. It's the big time, Shailesh. Don't blow it.
Right, okay. So, just a bit of background on me. I worked in IT for many, many years for a very, very large corporate company.
Okay.
Very familiar with the IT. Been a programmer at one point myself, so there's nothing about IT that phases me really.
Sure.
Anyway, the family owned a post office in Clapham.
Okay.
Since 1988. We then had another one in Purley, and we had another one in Twickenham. So we still got a post office in Purley at the moment.
Right.
All I can say to you is, James, this software that we're still using currently is still dodgy. It hasn't been changed.
Well, I can't double check that, and I've got no reason to doubt what you're telling me. But yeah. What is not controversial is your account of what the dodginess historically involves. So we heard that Richard's daughter would notice the shortfall and make it up herself.
Yeah, and we're still doing that currently. I mean, the post office cannot say you don't know how to run the accounting software because we've been doing it for 30 years. The software would throw up an anomaly once in a while. It's not a huge amount like the other postmasters, but it would be 15, 20 quid, 100 quid, 20. And we'd just say, we'd look through the accounts. We can't find anything. What we're going to do, we'll take the money out of our pocket, put it into the post office, and then the accounts will balance. And then, we're off for another week with the balancing. So this is an ongoing thing with most postmasters.
How do you answer that question that's running through the programme this morning? Why has it taken this television programme to light a fire underneath an issue that was quite widely known and quite widely reported?
James, the fact is that people don't care. At the end of the day...
But they care today.
Well, they do today because they've seen the reality of what the post office has done to postmasters. We who are in the post office have known that this has been happening for a long time. Yes. And there have been lots of postmasters up and down the country who've tried to get this agenda on the front pages of newspapers, but people have not been interested. It doesn't sell newspapers.
It doesn't sell newspapers. Although Private Eye, as we have already discussed and we'll discover further shortly, as continues to be a very popular organ and has covered this fairly well. Thank you. Is that part of the reason why you let go of the post offices in Clapham and Twickenham because of the problem?
No. One of the reasons is I've come to an age where I'm going to retire soon.
You're taking it easy, Shailesh. You're kicking back a bit.
I don't know about taking it easy, mate. We've been absolutely manic in the post office the last couple of weeks, just before Christmas.
Yeah, of course you have. Of course you have.
Just one other thing, James,
please.
that people don't seem to realise is the post office management screwed the postmasters for hundreds of thousands of pounds. Yeah. And what they're doing now is doing the same thing now. What they're saying to existing postmasters is, it's cost us hundreds of millions for this court case, and now we're going to make you pay for it because we're going to take it out of your remuneration in the future. And that's why this does not have the feeling of a fait accompli, does it? It doesn't feel like this chapter or indeed this story is over. In some ways, it's only just beginning. And the case of Paula Vanel's is proof of that particular pudding. One minister saying yesterday she should lose her CBE. It's disgraceful what has happened to these people, to which you cannot help but respond, you've been in power for 14 years. A second cabinet minister said that if Ms Venables did not willfully give up her honour, then she should have it removed. She willfully obfuscated and sought to defend the indefensible, and that is just not honourable or becoming of the office, said a cabinet minister to the Daily Telegraph. Speaking of Conservative politicians and indeed honourableness, you'll never guess who is going to fight. You remember Peter Bone? Do you remember Peter Bone? Thank you, Shailesh. Take care, mate. Do you remember Peter Bone? Tory MP? It was a recall petition, wasn't it, after he was found to have sexually harassed junior members of staff. You're never going to guess who has been selected to fight that seat for the Tories in his constituency. Seriously, you're never going to guess. So I'll tell you after the headlines with Thomas Watts. It's 10:33. A lot of messages like this from Steve, who's in Witney. I worked in a shop that had a post office inside it. We had 6 different branch managers in about 18 months. They all spent ages trying to end the week balancing the books. None of them could. It appears to make a lot of sense now. Indeed, it does. Richard Brooks is an investigative journalist at Private Eye magazine, whose praises I have been singing all morning, not least because they were across this story before it was fashionable. And Richard joins me now. Back, I think, in about 2011, Richard, when Private Eye started covering this issue. When and how did you begin to appreciate the unprecedented scale of the problem?
Well, it was good morning. Back in 2011, we first picked up on this story, and I was just looking at the piece we wrote actually just before speaking to you, and it came, as you probably mentioned, Computer Weekly magazine had written some pieces about the story from about 2009. Nick Wallace had done a couple of programs for the BBC local investigative program. And having discovered a cluster of cases, I think, in the southeast, in the Surrey and Hampshire area, including Joe Hamilton, who was so prominent in the drama, and he said to us, you hang on, maybe you should take a look at this as well. So we did. We'd spent years writing about dodgy IT programs. They were dating from the sort of mid-90s, where almost every government department or public body decided that they'd solve all their problems by throwing billions or millions at IT companies, which is what the Department of Social Security had done with the post office, and they had this botched IT contract on their hands. They wasted about 700 million quid. It was a complete write-off, but the government decided, the new Labour government at the time decided that they needed to salvage something from the mess, and that is what the Horizon system was. So from the word go, it was a bit of a disaster.
Did you, or would you have expected? And I'm glad you've mentioned Computer Weekly and Nick Wallace. Did there come a point? And I know that you're a sober bunch over at Private Eye, but did there come a point where you were frustrated or surprised that it hadn't picked up wider momentum?
Yeah, right from the outset, really. By the time we were looking at it, Alan Bates had already got together quite a large group of sub-postmasters with the same problem. I mentioned the first piece we wrote, and in that we were quoting James Arbuthnot, yes, the MP who was then MP, Joe Hamilton's MP, who was saying, it can't be right that all these postmasters are dishonest. It's either them being dishonest or a dodgy computer system. I know which one I suspect. And there's also a line in that first piece we did saying, Ed Davey, who Postal Services Minister, simply washes his hands of the affair.
Yes.
So that's become a big revelation.
Continues to try to do so as well, really, doesn't he? I mean,
exactly. So this was the point. This was the shocking thing at the time, that despite all these cases, the government was just it was washing its hands of it. It was just taking Post Office's word for what was happening, and without any scepticism, without thinking, oh, well, Post Office would say that. They've got a massive interest.
You'd think there'd be a threshold, wouldn't you? You'd think, well, hang on. I mean, maybe there were 50 dodgy sub-postmasters out there, but I can't believe there's 100 or 200 or 407 or 700. But there never was. There was never a point at which antennae within the Post Office or within government started twitching.
No, they only had to look at their statistics, their own statistics on prosecutions. I haven't got exact numbers here, but they shot right up when Horizon came in. So there was no sort of reality check there saying, have people suddenly got dishonest? One of the shortfalls somebody had was £1 million. Yeah. And they were turning over, a few £1,000s a week. It was crazy. It was pretty clearly, obviously, the IT system, even if you didn't know about the bugs.
Yeah.
But of course, inside, they actually did know about the bugs. The rest of us outside were sort of scratching our heads thinking, come on, what's going on here? This can't be right.
How do you personally feel about the impact that the drama has had? Because I'm glancing at, I've got all the screens in my studio, which you visited, Richard. You know what the studio looks like.
Yeah.
So we've got all three news channels running. They've all got three different sub-postmasters telling their story. I mean, it has absolutely exploded. Even Rishi Sunak was talking about it yesterday, albeit that he got the dates a bit mixed up. I mean, there must be an element of better late than never for you, but also an element of good grief, you know.
Yeah.
Why does Toby Jones succeed where we have failed?
Yeah. I mean, yes, of course, it's great to see that this may be accelerating the process of justice for hundreds of people. Let's hope it does. But yeah, as you say, it is a bit depressing that all this information has been out there for years, and it's taken a drama to make people realise it's important. I mean, that is a bit of an indictment of our government, certainly the current government. You know, it's not as if it was just Private Eye and Computer Weekly and the others who've been writing about this for years. For several years, there's been some very good coverage of this in the Tory House newspaper, in the Mail. Tom Witherow in the Mail has written some great stuff over the last few years. So they've known full well about it. It's been right in their face. But for some reason, it takes a drama. I think there's something about the drama. Obviously, makes the victims of this very human. You just can't ignore it. And I think what that says is that they were actually dehumanising these people before that was put right on their TV screens. These were people without very loud voices, working class people, and big bureaucracy. To a big bureaucracy and a government, they were just a bit awkward. It was very messy. Doing anything would obviously open things up and create a bit of a stir. So it was much better to try to fob them off for decades.
And a word, if you would, on Paula Fennells. How culpable is she? Her role seems to be pretty grim.
It does. She presided over some very, very grim behaviour. You know, a lot of lies, misrepresentations, even to a judicial process, even to the litigation that Alan Bates led in that the Post Office told a lot of untruths. She covered up. She it was summarised in that part of the dramatisation where she said, which was verbatim, where she told people, "I need to be told it's okay. I need the evidence to say it's okay." So basically, she wanted to be told everything was fine by people beneath her. So it's a bit like, you know, in a lot of organised crime families, the top person doesn't exactly know the detail, but they pretty much give the message about what needs to be done. And I think, you know, there are going to be some very awkward questions when she appears before the public inquiry, which should be later this year.
And yes, it's not going anywhere now, this, is it? And finally, Richard Brooks, what should we be looking out for next? What are you beavering away on that could perhaps not of similar scale in terms of scandal, but similar kind of importance, perhaps?
Well, we've got all kinds of stories brewing. I was just looking at one today involving victims of tax fraudsters who HMRC is treating very harshly. People nick their details, claim tax rebates for them, and then HMRC goes after the victim. There's a big scandal there waiting to come out, I think. And the other thing we've talked about before is the trouble on Teesside, where there's a very, very dodgy development going on with lots of people making lots of money, and on which I think there might be some quite big news this week. So
there you go. Watch this space, as they say.
Yeah. Listen to it. Yeah, excellent.
If that isn't reason enough to treat yourself to Private Eye magazine every fortnight, then hopefully my ringing endorsement will tip you over the edge. Richard Brooks, investigative journalist at that magazine, who has been covering with colleagues this story since 2011, and very correctly, but also I think for our industry generously acknowledging the role that other people have played in that. Computer Weekly, I've said to you quite a few times that the trade press has now stepped into the breach that was once occupied by the national newspapers. National newspapers obsessed with opinion and othering and stoking up culture wars, whereas the trade press really does dig into the weeds of stuff in the way that Private Eye does. Although, as Richard reminded us, Tom Witherow at the Mail deserves credit, and Nick Wallace perhaps as much, if not more than anybody else, pursuing this really with the sort of tenacity that I think at one point it's all he did. He covered the court case. almost as a freelancer. I think he did actually just sit in court for months on end, covering it in ways that the rest of the media was not doing. What an astonishing personal vindication for him. We should probably talk to him this week, but I imagine an awful lot of people are beating a path to his door at the minute. I didn't forget to tell you who has been selected to fight the seat to replace the disgraced MP Peter Bone as the Tory candidate in the upcoming Wellingborough by-election. I didn't forget to tell you. I just took an executive editorial decision to build up even more tension. Mr. Bone, you will remember, left his wife for a physiotherapist 20 years his junior, who was at the time married with 2 children. He was kicked out of the Commons by a recall petition prompted by his suspension from Parliament over bullying and sexual misconduct allegations. The party association in that Northamptonshire seat have now selected the candidate who will replace him in the upcoming Wellingborough by-election. And you're not going to believe who it is. 10:48 is the time. It's a bit of a human nature phone-in as well as a current affairs one. This. What is it about the drama on ITV that has reached parts that an awful lot of very good journalism failed to reach? And part of it is the personal touch. It's a sort of human nature issue. It's that we can see them now. Richard Brooks, a private eye, describing the dehumanising of some of the victims of the post office scandal. And of course, what a drama does is rehumanise them, particularly when the portrayals by actors like Julie Hesmondhalgh and Toby Jones are so extraordinarily good. You just can imagine yourself. I can't find the tweet that focused on this, so forgive me for not giving you the credit you deserve. But when you said you can imagine yourself in that situation, it changes the whole relationship. Ricky says, people always cared, but the beauty of art, particularly a really poignant film or TV drama, boosts the justice movement to take on scandals and cover-ups. We saw it with Bloody Sunday. We saw it with Hillsborough. Jimmy McGovern's Hillsborough film, absolutely instrumental in undoing some of the lethal damage done by the disgraced former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and other elements of the British media. And Ricky adds optimistically, we'll see it soon with Grenfell. I certainly hope so. But the idea that you can... here it is. I think the TV drama from the Brexit Fails Twitter account. God knows what you're doing listening to this programme. I think the TV drama has had such an impact because viewers imagined themselves in the impossible positions that the postmasters were in. That's really well put. Milan is in Ashford. It wouldn't be a post office phone-in on LBC without a contribution from Milan, formerly of Chiswick, whose mum, Mrs. Joshi, runs the Strand on the Green post office, which for many years was my local branch. Milan, I hope you're well. I hope your mum's well. What would you like to say?
Hi, I hope you're well, James. My mum has been running that post office for decades. Thankfully, by fluke, she wasn't caught up in the Horizon scandal. However, I've taken a very nerdy personal interest in this for years. And there are many, many things that I could discuss. But, I mean, one of the things would be the scandal continues as of even last year, where I've written to Kevin Hollerake, Kevin James MP, who don't seem at all interested in the scandal the Post Office have done even last year alone.
Well, it's quite hard to get hold of Kevin Hollerake. He got engaged in a bit of a Twitter exchange with Daniel Lambert, our kind of go-to wine importer for Brexit-related issues of wine. I just digress briefly, Milan. And Daniel challenged him to come on to LBC and have a debate about it all. And then when we got in touch with him, he kept referring us to Downing Street. So good luck in getting a full and frank response from him. We're currently struggling, but you're moving on to a new area of concern, I think.
Well, I mean, because people think, right, this is the Post Office in the past,
yes,
and and you think, well, have they cleaned up their act? No, they haven't cleaned up their act. Even last year, they misled Parliament in their annual accounts by falsely asserting that the chair of the public inquiry said that they complied with the metrics for the disclosure of documents. He hadn't. It's a completely false statement.
Well, again, I have to take your word for this. I've got no way of checking or confirming in real time. But equally, I've got no reason to doubt you or to or certainly not to question your integrity. As a geeky observer of this, and with that sort of mopping your brow in relief that your lovely mum wasn't caught up in any of this, because she could very easily have been. Why do you think it takes a drama? What do you think it is about a TV drama that reaches parts other media can't reach?
I think in the age of Netflix and Prime and other providers are available, I think it's easier for people to engage in that. So, for example, that's what the conversation is. Oh, what are you watching now, and so on? What are you watching now, and so on? And that's it. Whereas, are you going to say, hey, what are you watching on Panorama at the moment? That's not going to be interesting to quite a few people. A lot of people may think it's very interesting, but the mass public will more likely to engage with what are you watching now, as in the drama. When they watch that, then the conversation starts, then the anger starts, and then the snowball effect from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that doesn't make us bad people, does it? That's a perfectly natural human sort of response. Dickens probably did more to describe 19th century poverty than the actual campaigners did in terms of making the public aware of it. But it does seem a little sad, a little unsatisfactory. I'm glad your mum wasn't caught up in it, and I shall keep an eye on the thing that you've just brought to our attention. Milan, thank you. Stay safe. Mark's on the Wirral. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I came in 2019. I lived in Vietnam before coming here.
Okay.
At the time we had a 9-year-old daughter who needed a good education as such, and simply couldn't afford the extortionate rates for international schools over there.
Okay.
Despite my accent, I am actually originally British, who've travelled a fair bit myself.
Okay.
And I bought a post office, and as a result of the usual stories of the discrepancies that just kept ballooning and ballooning. Straight away.
So quite soon after buying it, you're doing the books and they just don't balance.
I was in July 2017. By October 2017, I had discrepancies,
right,
and they just kept exacerbating as we went along. And as a result, the other factor with my wife being Vietnamese, she had to go back to Vietnam because that's the application process to get a visa for working. And while she was there, the deductions that they enforced on my remuneration because of the discrepancies meant that I couldn't prove to the government that I was earning enough to act as a sponsor for my wife.
Gosh.
So she was stuck in Vietnam for 13 months solid because we couldn't even pull the passport out.
I understand.
That's terrible. I'm so sorry. To take the risk of a visitor visa. So all of that led to the mental stresses, all the rest of it.
Yes.
I was then probably the very first person to be terminated, and I was already pretty destitute at the time because of all of the deductions. And 2019, the final appeal was rejected, and I was absolutely elated to see that the post office appeals were rejected. And then within 30 minutes, probably before his ink had dried on his decision, I got an email to say, you've been terminated. I'd had a discussion with post office representatives only a matter of maybe a week before.
Right.
And that they had gone through, they'd actually looked at it and said, because they kept also, by the way, just deducting in terms of remuneration income as we went along. So it became less and less as an income as well.
So I'm short of time. How? I mean, this is too late to help you then. These revelations and these. But presumably there's some satisfaction in seeing the light being shone so brightly into these dark corners.
Oh, absolutely. Now, what I will reiterate is that will say is that what they did is that they actually more or less gave me the money I put in back.
Good.
When you take all the calculations. However, it meant that I was working for 3 years without getting any income whatsoever.
And crucially, falling below that threshold for your wife's visa to come here. Mark, that's a terrible story that deserves a wider audience. It really does, and a really timely reminder of what goes on beneath the surface, even of what is now coming out. The attendant stories, the ripples, if you like, caused by the rocks being thrown into the pool, in this case by the post office. Take care. I want to squeeze in one more call if I can. Tony's in Horsham. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
well, you've asked a good question about why it's taken a TV drama to widen the interest in the post office story. And actually the reasons are that with libel laws in this country the way they are, it took a litigation in 2019,
Yes.
a 900-page judgment by Sir Peter Fraser, Mr. Justice Fraser, and he exposed the whole thing as a result of Alan Bates. And people were worried up until that point that they might get sued by Fujitsu. And after that, it was easy, plain sailing for the newspapers. The newspapers picked up on it. ITV Drama picked up on it. Took them, I think, about 3 years.
Yes.
And I think one of the main reasons why it's been so successful is because I don't think ITV's been given enough credit yet, really, for the people who are working on it, the fantastic writer, and the actors involved. They met the sub-postmasters. They got to know the story, and they understood it well enough to portray it in a way which has captured the nation's interest.
Yes, you're right.
And I think that's lodged in the national psyche.
It has, hasn't it? I heard an interview, I think, with the woman who ran the documentary production company and just knew that this was a story that demanded a wider retelling. So sort of went to ITV and got into a sort of partnership with a drama production company. So she, forgive me, I forget her name, but she was deeply impressive and very much a woman on a mission. What's your interest? You sound as if you have more than an amateurish interest in the story.
I've taken a personal interest in the story for more than 10 years and have followed it. And actually, it's disappointing for me to hear Kevin Hollinrake, the business minister,
Yes.
talking in very similar terms to his predecessors, even
Right.
during the height of the scandal. He's not. He's really. I suppose it's the civil servants who are calling the shots, and he's having his briefings written by them. And they're, of course, a little bit embarrassed by the whole thing.
Well, I don't think he'll be in a position to defend himself from that accusation anytime soon, because we've had an email from his office over the weekend. This is in response to that, his agreement, actually, to debate the pint of wine story, which he tried to present on Twitter as a great victory and a Brexit benefit with, I think, the biggest wine importer in Wales, Daniel Lambert. And Hollinrake said he would be up for that conversation. But we heard from him over the weekend, and his office told us, sorry, but the minister's diary has been jam-packed since the start of the year. We're obviously very busy with the post office scandal, for which Minister Hollinrake is the lead minister for. So I don't think we'll be able to pin anything down for the foreseeable future. I make of that what you will, Tony. And Peter Bone's constituency, the replacement to fight that seat after he was drummed out of Parliament in disgrace. Yeah, it's his girlfriend. 4 minutes after 11, quick glance back to the last hour. I'm sure we'll be returning to that topic. I got a really cool text off Martin Shaw, the actor, who reminds us that he was in a drama in 1990 called Who Bombed Birmingham? And of course the Birmingham Six, wrongfully imprisoned for the Birmingham pub bombings, the IRA Birmingham pub bombings, that they were released in 1991. And there was, I mean, most definitely a link between the two. And then there's Jimmy McGovern's Hillsborough drama. So it's not the first time, possibly being a bit hard on ourselves at 10 o'clock in the morning. Drama does play an important role in bringing things to public attention. It always has, and please God, it always will. And this is perhaps arguably the latest example of really strong storytelling in a dramatic context, reaching parts that really strong storytelling in a journalistic context simply can't. So thank you for that reminder, Martin. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a bit of a mad idea for the final hour of the programme today, based entirely on something that happened to me this morning. I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet, but I have been asked in the past to appear on Celebrity Hunted. And my experience this morning confirms my suspicion deep down, because at surface level, I think I'd be really good at it. I'm quite good at hiding. I think I'd be really good at it. But deep down, I think I'd be absolutely rubbish. And my experiences this morning in the environs of Ealing Broadway station confirm my fears that I'd actually be rubbish. But it has made me think about some stuff in ways that I haven't thought about before. And at the moment, as things stand, breaking news notwithstanding, I am minded to get stuck into that shortly after 12 o'clock this afternoon. Before that, quite a lot of newspapers carrying a story about parents being told to stop keeping children off school, whether it's with sore throats and runny noses that in a pre-COVID universe would not have been considered grounds for keeping children at home, or whether it is in the sort of broader context of absenteeism, and some newspapers choose to report this as parents perhaps not being quite robust enough in encouraging their children to go to school. I think that's a bit irresponsible. There's not much in the research that backs up that angle, but the idea of children with sniffles and sore throats being held back because we've still got a sort of a COVID legacy in place is relevant. So too, I suspect, is anxiety and mental health issues, which for children and adults alike have ballooned rather in recent years, already rising steadily, and then a bit of a spike during and after COVID. So I'm interested in this story for a variety of reasons, but I'm also interested in it for a completely left field reason. And this perhaps looks at children who just aren't going to school anymore. The first producer I ever had on this programme, a very mild-mannered lad, lovely man, absolutely obsessed with truant. I don't know why. And remember, I was quite young when I started this job. I didn't have a very broad palette of experience. And all of my secondary education took place in boarding schools. So I boarded from the age of 10. I was a weekly boarder from 10 to 12, and then a full boarder, as we called them, which meant you went home once a month if you were lucky, from the age of 12 to the age of 18. And so I never really had truancy in my locker. It was not an issue I had any real personal relationship with. I did bunk off class a little bit, but at boarding school, you can't not go to school. You might want to write this down. It's one of those insights of absolutely sparkling value. If you're at boarding school, you can't not go to school because you sleep there. It's not an option to not go to school. Even if you're going to bunk off class and get caught, you're still at school. There's no way you can not go to school if you're at boarding school. I mean, you could abscond from the actual school, but that's almost the opposite of not going to school. That's running away from school, which would be a different proposition entirely. So I never really had this personal understanding of the issue, but the first ever producer I had was absolutely obsessed with it. And the reason for his obsession, looking back, it must have been personal. Must have been people he was at school with. He was furious about, and he very rarely got angry, except with me. He very, very rarely got angry, but he was furious at government suggestions, and this would have been under Labour, government suggestions that parents should be punished when their children don't go to school, because he would say, what are you supposed to do? You've got a 16-year-old son who's refusing to get out of bed. He's a foot taller than you. You might be a single mother. What are you supposed to do? What on earth is the point of punishing a parent who has failed to get a child to school? There's no point. Even if there are some parents who are just sort of, I don't know, looking the other way or washing their hands of it. It's an insane policy. And yet here we are again, 20 years later. The story is doing the rounds again, with Gillian Keegan talking about how tackling attendance is her number one priority. And up to a point, she's right. Attending school is vital to a child's well-being, development and attainment. It has all sorts of ramifications for the rest of their lives. But here's the thing. This line here really struck me. We want all our children to have the best start in life because we know that attending school is vital to a child's well-being, development and attainment, as well as impact future career success. Now, I've got a bit of a theory bubbling away at the moment, and it covers quite a lot of society. It's a theory that I actually started developing when I was writing my latest book. I don't think I can call it my new book anymore. It's been out for quite a while. Lovely to see it at number 2 in the Times on Saturday. So thank you to everybody who gave or received it as a Christmas present, and a lovely review in the Herald up in Scotland over the weekend. But when I was writing How They Broke Britain, I found myself really thinking, and I didn't write much about this, if at all, but I found myself thinking about the social contract a lot, about the relationship between behaviour and expectation within a society. You know, when we talk about if you play by the rules, you expect certain returns. I think many adults are struggling really to see the social contract in clear terms at the moment. You sort of, particularly when we talk about property ownership, the idea that if you abided by certain preconditions, if you did this and you did that, you worked hard, you got a job, possibly you got a degree, then by the time you were in your late 20s, you would expect to be joining the property owning classes, right? That's like a silent social contract, you might call it. You do this, you do that, this happens. Now, in the last sort of 14 or 15 years, I genuinely worry that social contract has been broken. And it's been broken from two ends. It's been broken by people in power. I was thinking about Boris Johnson this morning on the way into work, and the fact that he is being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds by the Daily Mail to write columns about, this weekend it was about why he can't burn his Christmas tree. Why he can't set fire to his Christmas tree, and it turned out to be because of laws that were introduced when he was Prime Minister. That to me, it's very hard to really pinpoint the essence of Boris Johnson, but that comes pretty close, doesn't it? Writing absolute bilge for a ton of money from a newspaper where the editor-in-chief wanted to get a seat in the House of Lords that he constantly complains about being unelected but is desperate to be in. And Boris Johnson was the only politician corrupt enough to consider helping him into the House of Lords. So he rewards him with a column. But he left Parliament in absolute disgrace. People forget this about Boris Johnson. He wasn't just chased out by his own misdeeds. He resigned rather than face justice. He resigned rather than be subject to the recall petition that has sent Peter Bone scurrying for the hills to be replaced by his own girlfriend as the Conservative candidate in Wellingborough. Johnson left in absolute disgrace, and he was too cowardly even to face the music. So it was as if he resigned. It was as if he walked off the pitch before the referee could pull out the red card. That's how pathetic and cowardly Boris Johnson is. In fact, that's a superb analogy because it never happens. There is hardly any footballer, don't text me with an example of it, but every footballer thinks there's a chance he might stay on the pitch. He's going to wait to see whether the referee... So the bloke that you've just fouled is lying on the floor with a broken leg, but you're thinking somewhere deep, well, I might just get a yellow. I might be able to stay on the park. Maybe he was facing in the opposite direction. This analogy obviously doesn't accommodate VAR technology. But Boris Johnson marched off the pitch as soon as the referee blew his whistle because he was too cowardly to face the music and see the colour of the red card that was likely to come out of the referee's pocket. So the man left Parliament in absolute disgrace. And yet he gets rewarded, constantly reading about how much money he will be paid for speaking and how much money the Daily Mail pay him for columns about why he can't set fire to his own Christmas tree as a consequence of laws that he introduced as Prime Minister. Absolute disgrace. The disgraced former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. So that silent social contract where we grow up, ordinary people like you and me, we grow up thinking if you abide by the rules, you get a certain return. And then you come at it from the other end. You come at it from young people growing up now, looking at what lies ahead of them. And this is not a happy conversation. All right, we are going to ask the question of why does your child not go to school? Because, as is often the case with tabloid journalism, the answers are myriad, complicated, sophisticated, nuanced, and difficult. Tabloid journalism demands that you pretend the world is none of those things. Everything is black and white. Everything is binary. Everything is either something to be celebrated or ammunition with which to attack people you've never met. So the children growing up look at the social contract, what I call the silent social contract. And I wonder how many of them just think to themselves, well, what's the point? What's the point? I don't like school. I find school boring. In previous generations, you really understood the relationship between school and future. You'd think, look, I find it really boring, but I've got to get my GCSEs. I've got to get my A-levels, otherwise I won't get a decent job. And if I don't get a decent job, I won't have a decent lifestyle. If I don't have a decent lifestyle, I'll never be a property owner, or I'll never be able to rent a nice place. I genuinely fear, and I don't think you can convince me that I'm wrong on this, actually, because it's just an opinion, it's not counting. I genuinely fear that a lot of young people are looking at the social contract, the silent social contract, and they're seeing the most powerful, influential people in our society cheating and lying and prospering. You know? The people that sold them Brexit, stole their birthright, promoted, prospering. The liars, the cheats that have populated government now for years. The politicians who've sat on their hands for the post office scandal. That silent social contract. Oh, what's that? You've been chased out of Parliament in disgrace, and they've chosen your girlfriend to fight. Well, there's no. It's as if that silent social contract has broken. And I don't know whether that plays a part in this. So have you ever had to explain to your children why it's important to study Pythagoras? Why do I need to do Pythagoras' theorem, Dad? Why do I have to do algebra, Mum? I'm never ever going to need Pythagoras' theorem when I grow up. I'm never going to need algebra. And you try to explain to them, or I do, I try to explain to them that it's a bit like doing physical exercise. You've got muscles in your brain that you need to flex. And studying these things, these issues, they flex muscles that don't get flexed in any other circumstances. And the better muscles, the more muscly you are, the better conditioned your brain is, the better equipped you are for the life ahead. So you might not actually need to deploy Pythagoras' theorem at any point, but the mental training that learning and understanding that has given to you will prove useful in all manner of other areas at unspecified points in the future. God, I hated chemistry. Man, I hated chemistry. Once you stop doing experiments, I used to like doing experiments, but if it involved a Bunsen burner, I was in like Flynn. But once you moved away from the experiment, I hated it. I hated physics even more. And I could just about make that argument 10 years ago. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. It's really important. But I don't know whether this will work as a phone-in. I don't know whether I'm sounding mad to you. But if you've got a young person in your family who just doesn't see the point of school anymore, I wonder whether it's because we can no longer tell them that if you work hard and keep your nose clean, you'll be all right. We live in a society now where people who are lazy and feckless and dishonest and fraudulent and disingenuous and unkind become Prime Minister. How do you explain to a young person why going to school and obeying the rules is important when we have somehow created a society where telling lies and being lazy can give you the keys to Downing Street, or simply being useless at everything like Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak? You don't actually have to be morally corrupt like Boris Johnson. So there's two things going on here. Forgive me, it's even longer than usual, this introduction. There's two things going on here. There's the top of the mountain being populated by profoundly dishonest and feckless people, unserious people. And then there's the bottom of the mountain where working hard and playing by the rules means you might just about survive. It doesn't mean you're going to be on the property ladder by the time you're 30. So why is your child not going to school? 0345 6060973. I'll take any answer you've got on that. Why is your child not going to school? And I'm particularly interested in hearing from you, whether you're a parent or not, if you recognise my description there of the silent social contract being broken, because that's the kind of stuff that is generational in its impact. Why should I? So here is a child. Here is a mythical 15-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old. Okay? Why? What's the point, Mum? Why should I work hard at school? Why should I go to school? What do you say? In fact, you can all play that game. What do you say to that 16-year-old? Why should I go to school? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. The story is responsibly reported as COVID-era attitudes to school attendance risk damaging children. Irresponsibly reported without any evidence, really, that parents are just letting their children take time off school whenever they please. But the numbers are striking, and the reasons behind serial absenteeism or even school refusal, I think, are complex. And I'm just wondering this morning how much of it might have something to do with the difficulty that a teenager has today in understanding the importance of going to school and working hard, because the simple relationship between application and ambition doesn't seem to me to be in place in the way that it was when I was young, or even 10, 20 years ago. I don't know, it's just a thought, and sometimes we have our best conversations, don't we, when it's all a little bit out there. Terry's in Ruislip. Terry, what do you reckon?
Hello, James. It's good to have the opportunity to talk with you again about one of my favourite subjects, education.
Yes, carry on.
I think that you're absolutely right to say that the social... Don't worry, in a minute I'm going to say something I disagree with you on. But I think you're absolutely right to say that the social contract behind education has been broken. You see, I'm 73. Now, when I was younger, it was quite straightforward. Work hard, pass your exams, get a qualification, get a job, and it will probably be as permanent as you want it to be.
Yes.
Get a mortgage, and you live your life. Now those things simply don't apply. You know, pass your exams, go to university, build up a debt, and there is no guarantee of a well-paid, permanent job.
No, this is true.
And I have to say that there is a part of me which actually welcomes this crisis in school attendance. Now, I accept all the social consequences of having young people, not going to school. I mean, I think that's really problematic.
Yes.
But I think what lies behind it is that young people and their parents are beginning to realize that what they're being taught at school is simply not relevant to lead a fulfilling life in the 21st century. And the bit I disagree with you about is the bit about Pythagoras being a form of mental exercise.
I didn't see that coming. Go on, tell me more. But this is what I deploy. This is how I try and justify the teaching of Pythagoras to my children. It isn't necessarily what I believe.
Well, my bête noire is getting the 16-year-olds to memorise the formula for solving a quadratic equation.
Yes, that still happens.
There is absolutely no reason to do that. They'll never solve a 90% of them will never solve a quadratic equation once they leave their last.
Or suffer from their inability to do so.
Yes, but there will be some, and I think actually I might put myself in that category, for whom abstract mathematics, if you want to use that term, is a really important part of the way they think.
Yes.
So what we need, I think we need two things. I think we need much more flexibility in the education of teenagers. And I think lying behind the curriculum that I have in mind are 5 things, all of which begin with C, which we need to promote. The first is critical thinking.
Yep.
Never more important than in this world of lies and untruth.
Culture wars.
Creativity, which unfortunately has been downgraded in our schools since I was teaching there.
Yes.
The third one is collaboration, which of course the exam-focused culture really militates against.
I like this.
The fifth one is communication.
Hang on, you missed out the fourth one.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
That's all right.
I can't count.
Maths is also important, but it doesn't begin with C.
Yes. So the fourth one is communication.
Yes.
And even Rishi Sunak has acknowledged that.
There you go. The fifth one is collaboration.
I've got 2 words.
Go on.
And I don't know which of these 2 words is the more important one. The fifth one is compassion/concern. Yeah. And I think Boris Johnson is the classic example of somebody who has, in one sense, the best education that money could buy at Eton and then at Oxbridge.
Yes.
And yet he clearly lacked concern and compassion for others.
I wonder if it can be taught to a character like that. But it can certainly be taught to others.
I
love that. That's a beautiful quintet of qualities, actually.
Well, thank you. I think then we need to redesign a curriculum, and people have done some work on this. There's a thing called the Mastery, I've forgotten the name. It's called something like the Mastery Framework. It comes from the United States, where they look at what a young person is learning, and they map it against this sort of...
That's fascinating. That really is. We're going to run out of time, but in a sense, I think you've highlighted another element of... we don't need to disagree about Pythagoras, but recent policy has all been framed towards academic value only exists if it has a commercial value. Qualifications are only of use if they enhance your employability. In some ways, you've gone in the opposite direction, but you'll create a healthier population who will then be, by almost definition, they'll be more productive as well. So that's like a bonus. They'll be happier, they'll be more fulfilled, ergo they'll be more productive. So whichever way you look at it, we're going in the wrong direction. So you add a new dimension. I've got the notion of a social contract being breached because young people can't see the relationship between effort and reward. You're redefining reward in a way, I think, Terry, and that justifies the effort.
Well, I think so, and I think that we mustn't only think of school in terms of financial terms.
No, but I think increasingly they do, and that might be another reason why children aren't turning up, because you're saying you've got to go to school, otherwise you won't get a decent job, and they're looking at the jobs that are available, and they're thinking, well, I'm not going to go to school.
Yeah, and you ask people of my age or even a bit younger, what was the thing at school that really made a difference to you as a person? And very often it'll be something like music, which is what I taught, or it might be the school sailing club.
Yes.
It's those things
Chess,
which have been pushed
sport.
out.
It could be anything, couldn't it? Something that was not... Terry, you're a star. I always love talking to you. I shall remember those 5 C's. But before you go, is it minus b plus or minus the square root of 4ac over 2a?
Correct. X equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you see, why is there a bit of my brain uselessly remembering that from 1966?
All I can say with confidence, Terry, is that only one of us understood it. And it wasn't me. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 26 minutes to 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm wondering why your child is missing so much school. Okay, and any answers at all to that, because it is going to be a lot more nuanced than the headlines allow. Well, some of the headlines allow. Some people handling it responsibly. Times do a decent job, actually. In the Telegraph, the Guardian has it under this: Labour and Tories set out rival plans to cut school absences, anxiety, all manner of issues, post-COVID paranoia almost. But also, my pet theory is that it is increasingly difficult, and Terry helped me make this point. What a star he is. It's increasingly difficult to explain to children why it's important. Here's a great point from Helen, who's in Bewdley, hopefully not underwater, Helen. £15 per hour for a junior doctor. They might be witnessing the dumbing down of salaries warranted by graduates. They might quite rightly be considering the fact that they'll be better paid in adulthood by undertaking a trade. And so the acquisition of high academic grades is not as important to them as it would have been to older generations. That's another element to it as well. Why do I need to study physics? Why do I need to work hard at school? I'm never going to be able to buy a home. It's quite bleak, isn't it? And also, I would throw into the mix the fact that we seem at the moment, at this stage in the cycle of British history, to reward liars and cheats with the biggest prizes, the greatest baubles. Look at who have been put into the House of Lords recently. The man that presided over vote leave when it was breaking electoral law. The man who has been sharing the most misogynistic and vile opinions regarding Carol Vorderman. Who else has been put into that? I mean, some of the most ridiculous human beings ever to draw breath in this country been put in the House of Lords in the last 13 years. So why? Where's that relationship between hard work and reward? I don't see it, so why do the hard work? Toby's in Wandsworth. Toby, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I never call phone-ins, but weirdly I was listening to you in the car
on my way.
I get everyone in the end. Everyone in the end, Toby. So don't feel bad.
Funnily enough, the last time I called you was about 10 years ago, and it was about coincidences. And today I was listening to you in the car, driving to try and convince my son, he's at his mum's, that he needs to go into school to do his mock exam today. And I just thought I have to call because, he's going through all that.
Is he?
He's going through, he can't see the point in it. He's on the internet, reads these Reddit forums about anti-work and all the work.
I don't know. No, don't gloss over that. I don't know about that. What does that mean?
Oh, anti-work is a big Reddit forum where people post horror stories about their work, where they say, why don't we all get a free basic income?
Okay.
Which is another story entirely.
Yes.
And the more I tell him that most of these people are firstly based in America, where work laws are much less strict, and second of all, people are happy in their jobs, also don't post on the internet. But it doesn't matter, these stories are there.
And there are some powerful cases to be made for a universal basic income as well, actually. And probably in his lifetime, if not in ours, I think it probably will come to pass. But none of that helps you in the moment, does it?
It does not. And he, as you say, how can you force a child? You can't force a child. It's impossible unless you use physical strength, but you can't when they're 17.
No.
And even when they're younger, you can't really, because it doesn't work like that.
Nor would you particularly want to be sort of dragging them around by their earlobes.
You want them to choose themselves. You want to find a way to convince them, but they don't seem to be listening.
So he doesn't see the point in studying. Is it that simple? Is it that straightforward?
Yeah. He also seems to believe that he's convinced himself that revision and homework are conspiracies.
Okay. I like the sound of the kid. I mean, he's clearly not short of imagination.
No. He's a bright kid.
Yes.
He says if teachers aren't able to teach me in school, then they're not doing their job properly.
So he shouldn't need to study anything at home. He should come out of class by a sort of form of intellectual osmosis. His brain should be full of all the knowledge that he needs.
Exactly.
He has half a point, doesn't he?
Consolidation. Well, yes, but you've got to consolidate.
Of course you do.
Try telling him this. And he goes, yes, there's half a point. There's a half point to everything.
Yes.
And he manages to convince himself of all of this.
Blimey. Are you worried?
Yeah, really worried.
Yeah.
Really worried, because it's his mocks now, it's his A-levels in a few months. He may well just do this. So he's convinced himself he's ill this morning. He may well be slightly ill, and it may well have been brought on by mental health issues, which I think absolutely were caused by the pandemic and by all sorts of other things that are going on. And it's got out of practice at going to school regularly. And it's a great shame. But also, yes, there is all that stuff that isn't on the curriculum anymore. The fun stuff seems to have been forgotten about, as your last caller was saying, which is such a huge shame.
Do you think it will pass? Do you think this cohort that was caught up in COVID in such an unpleasant and unfair way is unrepresentative? I don't know if you've got younger children, whether or not it is the sort of 13 to 18-year-olds that are in this catchment as opposed to the 7 to 13-year-olds.
I don't know, but I do agree with, I don't know if you know about Sir Ken Robinson, who believed that education needs an entire paradigm shift, because in many ways it knocks creativity out of kids who are
sounds like Terry.
Creative.
Sounds like the caller we had on while you were on hold, actually, who made those points very powerfully. Something. Go on.
We need to encourage creativity, and we need to, learning by rote, it should be a thing of the past. These days, you should go into an exam and everything should be there to help you, and then you use what you've learnt, or what the processes that you've learnt to help you answer questions, rather than just having to remember facts. No one can see the point of that anymore because the internet is there.
And you're right, the system perhaps hasn't caught up with that. That's why we often talk about calculators and it being a controversial conversation, even when I started in this job, as to whether children should take calculators into exams. Thank you, Toby. And that last point you make there, it actually is why your boy has half a point. I hope everything comes out in the wash. I really do. It's a terribly tricky time. When I was a particularly difficult teenager, but I was dealing with monks and teachers. I wasn't at home with mum and dad. But if you just don't see the point of doing something, it's very hard sometimes to persuade young people that they just should. It's the point, I think, in the relationship where the answer to the question why, because I say so, no longer applies. I don't know when that happens. Some people it may happen at 10, some people at 14, 16. Why do I have to do that? Because I say so. Just eventually that runs out of road. Julia's on the Isle of Man. Julia, what would you like to say?
Hi. Yeah, I've got a 14-year-old son, and I mean, he doesn't miss a lot of school, but I have that question all the time, and I think.
Well, why should I? What's the point?
Why, what's the point? Yeah, coming back from school, and as soon as he goes to school, he comes home and he's moody and he's angry because he probably feels he's not doing really well either. Because we're still trying to squeeze kids into boxes. And, he's coming home going, well, why should I study geography? Why do I need to do that? I'm just about to go and fetch him from his religious studies mock exam. Like, why do I need to do that? So I think the system needs to change and it needs to become more relevant. But with him, also, when we were kids, if you had a bad influence friend, your parents knew who they were. But now, and I know certainly me, I'm competing with the likes of, I'm sorry to say this name, but Andrew Tate.
Oh, dear. And I'm sorry.
That is a huge influence because he is, people like him are saying, you need to study my university because that's relevant to the modern age.
You too can grow up to be an alleged sex trafficker if only you follow these pointers and...
and P.S. that's a conspiracy. But I mean, I think hopefully my son's getting out the other side. But it is his voice, and I get his emails. I start every day with Andrew Tate and me because I want to know what my kid is consuming, and it is around that. It's about hard work, etc. But traditional schooling is rubbish. So when you're competing with those influence, and it's not just him,
No, I know, and we shouldn't actually dismiss him just because he's so unpleasant. If he's influential, he's significant, isn't he? Or he's relevant. But you then struggle, and this is where the conversation has gone. We struggle, our generation, to point at the proof that doing things the traditionally correct way is worth doing, because you can't say property ownership, you can't say good job, you can't point at the things that my dad could point at when he was trying to persuade me to work a bit harder at school.
No, and my son is he's frustrated because actually he's constantly working on his billion-pound idea,
right,
to create, which is great. We do encourage that, but he gets frustrated and he resents it because he thinks he should be earning $1 million. He's going to be a millionaire or billionaire by the time he's 16. I said, give it till 18.
Yeah. Give yourself a break. Give yourself a break.
Expectations. Yes. But, school competes with that. So he doesn't have time. He doesn't have time to think about it. So what we do say is, I do say to him, the system isn't up to, the system doesn't work anymore, but it's the only system we have. So study so that you have choices, so that if you're not a billionaire by the time you're 18 and all of a sudden you decide you want to be an architect, you have the choice.
Choices is a great word. Choices is strong.
Only choice.
Choices. Yeah. I use that a lot, actually, because that really is what privilege gives you as well. That's what private education gives you. It gives you more choices. A degree gives you more choices, so that when you reach these forks in the road, there are more paths to choose from when you get to them. The more that you've got in your locker, the more that you've accrued in terms of achievement or qualification or experience. That's a really good point, actually. You're clearly doing something right. But as with Toby, I wish you well. I really do. These are tough conversations. What's the point? I mean, kids have been saying that forever. I just think it was easier to answer in the past than it is now. 11:45 is the time. It's 11:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question, it's this, isn't it? The Education Secretary, Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, said at the weekend that school absenteeism, which is rocketing, it's 1 in 5 children regularly out of school, likely to rise to 1 in 4 in the near future. And she says it's damaging the life chances of children. Which it probably is. I mean, I'd struggle to make the case for saying that it isn't, but it's a lot harder to prove than it was when I was young, or perhaps when you were young. The relationship between effort, qualification, result, and then reward or achievement or attainment was just a lot easier to plot, I think, a lot clearer. If you want to be a rocket scientist, says this text, you will need Pythagoras and a great deal more, says Tom. To which the response of the teenagers we've been talking about today would be, I don't want to be a rocket scientist. That's why I like Julia's points about choice. So Julia and Toby both dealing with sons who would probably respond to that by saying, I don't want to be a rocket scientist, so jog on. But choices, you might not want to be a rocket scientist, but you might discover something further down the line that will be easier to access if you've worked harder at school. If you've done that subject you didn't see the point of. It might sound unlikely, but if you just couch it in terms of choices, and then you come back to the silent social contract that I opened the hour with, the idea that just doesn't seem to apply anymore. And then perhaps the most important factor of it all is that we have created a society, particularly post-Brexit, where the greatest rewards and prizes are reserved for the biggest cheats and liars. Anyone who pays any attention at all to newspaper-led media is going to be of the view, well, look, either you're brainwashed and you don't realise that they're cheats and liars, you're too busy doffing your cap and bending your knee, tugging your forelock, or you're looking at the landscape of rewards and honours and wealth, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, and you're just seeing the biggest cheats and liars, or charlatans and ignoramuses being given the biggest reward. So what's the point of working hard at chemistry when you can just sort of lie your way to Downing Street? And then when you get caught, you get given millions of pounds by the owner of the Daily Mail, who went to the same school. And I didn't go to that school, so what's the point in trying? It's a tough conversation. Bree's in Bournemouth. Bree, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to speak to you. I'm a huge subscriber of your work. I love the show, the podcast, and I'm loving reading the book.
Fantastic. It's the hat trick. All you need now is a board game. Carry on, Bree.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give you my opinion, which is from an African perspective. I am from the developing world, or the third world, or as DJ T lovingly calls poo hole country,
yes,
where all that is drummed into us from the second we enter the schooling system, if we're privileged enough to go to school, is that you need to go to school to get an education, as that is the key to success. And success being that the road from your cradle to the grave will be a lot more comfortable and easier. And please don't shoot me for this, but in my opinion, in the 28 years that I lived here, I found it from the time I came here in kind of 1998, it was a trend where, it was the era where if you're 16, you fell pregnant, you got a council house, and you just
that was
money off the top.
Yeah, but that was a world portrayed in right-wing newspapers that wasn't supported by any statistical evidence whatsoever.
Oh, right. Okay, so I'm wrong there. But
yes, very, very wrong.
As an immigrant, when I came here, I just thought, oh my gosh, life is too easy here, because all we've ever been taught in Africa is you've got to go to school. And school was, it's not for everybody. And I was an average student, but I left school with qualifications, and I came here and I got my degree. And I'm drumming the same strict African culture into my half English, half African children, where they have no choice.
But here's the thing. So if I was your parent and you were to turn to me and say, what's the point? I could say to you, well, if you work hard, you'll be able to go to England to do your degree. You'll be able to live a life that is probably not available to you in your home country. The rewards you will receive in return for your effort and your exertions are pretty easy to describe and pretty easy to imagine. But it's not true for a teenager in England today. What are the rewards you would describe to I don't know how old, let's say a 13-year-old who doesn't see the point in working hard at school? What do you say to them that is somehow comparable to the life-changing experiences you could receive in return for your exertions?
I think what I tell my 13-year-old daughter is that, listen, I know it's a complex issue like you described, James, but I think school gives us a certain resilience and a discipline and a commitment, because it is difficult for a lot of teenagers now post-COVID and this, that, and the other. And I work within the NHS, so, I understand a lot of the issues. However, I do see that, and again, this is a very limited perspective.
Well, stop making excuses for your answer and tell me what it is.
No, well, I think, you know what, James, there's a bit of snowflakey culture sometimes.
A bit of what?
Snowflakey culture where,
Snowflakey culture?
Yeah, you know, where some people they don't want to go to school and there's no accountability and there's no.
But no, you're talking about other people's children now. You're not talking about your own. Here is a 13-year-old who says, "What's the point of working hard?" To which you respond by saying,
"You've got to go to school because you've got no choice."
Yes, but that's saying that's the because I say so school of thought, and we're talking about parents who've grown out of that sort of slightly juvenile response. It's you've got to provide an intellectual and thoughtful answer to the question, Bree.
Well, my answer
evidence-based, ideally.
Okay. Well, you see, I'm African, and we don't do evidence.
Well, that's. I mean, if someone else said that, it would actually be racist. So we'll gloss over that quite quickly. In answer to the question, why should I work hard at school, or even why should I go to school? What's your intelligent, thoughtful, evidence-based answer to that question for a kid who can't see the point?
Because to me, you can gain some skills which will help you later on in life to be able to be employable or to start your own business or to...
Well, what skills?
Whatever skills you may want to,
But I want to start... I know what I want to do. I don't need chemistry to open a storage warehouse or to become an accountant or whatever it may be.
But that chemistry, like you described earlier, James...
No, you can't use my arguments because you think I'm snowflakey. You have to use your argument.
No. You said earlier in the show that although you didn't like Pythagoras' theorem or chemistry or what have you, you say to your children that, listen, you still need to flex those muscles
but I'm wrong.
In your brain.
But I'm wrong.
But you're not wrong.
Well, I think I am wrong.
No, I think you're right.
Okay, so where will I be able to use Pythagoras when I set up my own business?
Well, you'll just know it if it comes up in
what
a
is it?
quiz.
What is it?
Well, is it the square roots is equal to the sum of the something on the other two sides? I don't know. I don't know Pythagoras. But
so you didn't need it then, Mum?
No.
Why do I?
No, but it is good for you.
Well, then why didn't you do it? Why didn't you work harder? You can't even remember it.
Well, I've got a degree and I've got a job and I contribute to society.
I didn't ask for your autobiography. I asked for you to tell me why Pythagoras is worth studying.
Well, I don't know, James.
No, well, exactly. So let's just recap over the conversation, okay? We can be confident that the depiction of 16-year-old girls all going out to get pregnant to get a council house is evidence that you never did critical thinking or media studies at school.
Okay.
And your use of the word snowflake suggests that even 20, 30 years later, you're still getting your ideas from very ignorant, non-evidence-based right-wing journalism, because that's the only place in which that word is ever treated with any credence. And finally, your insistence that you need to study things like Pythagoras is somewhat undermined by the fact that you don't know what it is.
James, I just want to say I would like my children to go to school because
everybody wants their children to go to school. Today's phone-in is about the difficulty of telling them why they should in the modern world, not in Africa 30 years ago, but in Bournemouth today.
I think, in my opinion, they should go to school because school will give them that resilience, the discipline and the commitment.
Resilience, discipline and commitment. What subject do you do that in?
Well, just in having to deal, personal skills, interaction with other people, learning how to deal with conflict.
Fine, but none of that's on the curriculum. Is it?
Well,
and that might be the point. Maybe we should be paying a little bit more attention to stuff that is not actually traditionally on the curriculum. But that's kind of the point the children are making when they say, what's the point of studying Pythagoras? Thank you, Bree. Thank you for the kind words. I hope you continue to enjoy How They Broke Britain. I sense that, were this a medical programme, it might have been prescribed, let alone gifted. It's coming up to 12 noon. All right, I've got a completely crazy idea for the next hour, based entirely upon a nightmare that I had before I got to work this morning. Stay tuned to find out whether it works. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. So you may consider the next conversation to be ridiculous because you have already visited the places that I'm about to describe. You may consider it to be fascinating because you haven't visited the places that I describe. Or you may consider it to be completely compelling because you have visited the places that I'm about to describe and you share my sense of absolute wonder that you hadn't noticed before how much the world had changed. Okay? I just underpin that with the fact that I have on a couple of occasions been invited to do Celebrity Hunted, that program where people kind of have to evade pursuit. And I've always thought, on one level, at first glance, I'd probably be quite good at it. And then the more I've thought about it, the more I've wondered whether I actually would. And I think now that 2 hours have passed, or 3 hours have passed since I had this experience, I'm back to thinking I would actually be quite good at it, even though in the moment I panicked. And the reason I panicked was because I had to get to work. But if you're on Celebrity Hunted, you don't have to get to work, do you? So anyway, here's what happened. Still the school holidays at the moment. So Mrs. O'Brien very kindly offered to drive me to the station this morning because she was going to go and walk the dog. I normally get the bus to the station. And because I saw last night that the trains were not on strike, Sadiq Khan had reached a settlement with the RMT and the mooted industrial action for this week had been postponed. Inevitably, the right-wing newspapers are furious with him about this, but they also would have been furious with him if he hadn't reached. It's almost as if they're completely corrupt and biased, isn't it? I don't know. How cross would the Daily Telegraph have been today if Sadiq Khan hadn't managed to prevent the RMT from striking this week, on a scale of 1 to 10? Yeah, that's what I thought. But he has. So now the front page story is Khan bows to unions over tube strikes. So if you're Sadiq Khan, not only do you get your surname in the headline when Rishi Sunak gets his first name, it's always Rishi this and Rishi that. God knows it was Boris the other and Boris. But if he manages to negotiate with the RMT to the point where a mooted 4-day strike is suspended just 20 minutes before it was due to start, he gets attacked. But if he hadn't managed to reach a settlement with the RMT, he would have been attacked. Just bear that in mind because it's an election year. And I just think that's keep an eye on these people because they do not wish you well. Anyway, I made a mistake this morning of not checking the travel. If you're wondering why a hotshot high flyer like me doesn't get a limousine to work, the answer is Greta Thunberg and teenage daughters. So I normally get public transport into work. And I normally forget to check that everything's running on time because usually it does. And I know I'm in London, so the idea of walking out of your front door confident that a bus will be along in a minute is alien to many, many people listening to this programme. But I still live in London. There's 2 or 3 different buses I can get to the same destination, and I very rarely would wait more than 8 minutes. Some days I literally just step onto the bus as it put. Those are the best days, aren't they? The days when you see the bus coming as you come around the corner, and you know you don't even have to increase your pace. You're just going to carry on walking at the same pace. The bus approaches the bus stop. You approach the bus stop from the north. The bus is coming from the south. The bus slows. The doors open. You haven't changed your pace at all. You remove your phone from your pocket and you step onto the bus and you pop your phone on the reader and you make your way, and it's as if it's choreographed. And for a brief moment you feel like you're starring in La La Land or some beautiful Hollywood musical. Everything is perfectly calibrated, and then about 3 days a year, then you get to your destination. You walk into the tube station, you click on the reader again, you make your way down the stairs. You notice that the train is coming towards you as you come down the stairs to the platform. And you know that the train is going to... And you get on the train at the same spot so that you're near the right exit when you get to your destination. And you know that this is going to fit perfectly. So again, you don't change your pace, you don't quicken your pace, you don't slow down, you don't stop. The train is moving. From the west, you are coming in an easterly direction. And as you get to the point where you prefer to get on the train every day, the train slows to a halt, the doors open, and without breaking stride, you step onto the tube and you get a seat. Those at the age of, 52 next week, those are the days that I dream of. I used to dream of winning Oscars. Now those are the moments of peak and complete satisfaction for me. When the public transport planets align and everything fits together like, I don't know, a hand into a glove. But I digress. So I didn't check. Mrs. O'Brien kindly drops me off at the station. I tootle down the stairs. I look at the board. It says next train, 18 minutes. 18 minutes? And I think, well, Mrs. O'Brien's still probably... So I ring her quickly. So you still around? She goes, yeah, I'm just turning around. I said, oh, can you drive me to Ealing. I'll get on the Elizabeth line. And she says, yeah, of course I can, darling. So I come back up the stairs, I get back in the car, and it's an unfamiliar route to go from that station to that station. So I use my phone, I use Waze on my phone, yeah, and put in the destination and pop it on the dashboard for her so she can see where she's going. And get to Ealing Broadway. I hop out of the car a bit early because, you know, there's one-ways and stuff like that. Thank you very much. And then I'm standing on the pavement in Ealing, and I realise that my phone is still on the dashboard of my wife's car. Well, that's fine, because I carry around a little leather credit card holder which contains a bit of ID, a few bank cards. It's got a £20 note in the back of it in case of emergency. So that doesn't... And I pat the back pocket of my jeans, and I remember that I'm not wearing the trousers I wore yesterday, and that my little card holder, my wallet, if you prefer, is in the other trousers. So I am at Ealing Broadway. My wife is driving away with my phone. I made a half-hearted effort to catch her up in the hope that she might stop at the next lights, but she's disappeared over the horizon. And I don't have any bank cards on me. And I've got to be at work in an hour and a half. Right? So when I was a kid, I would have found a call box and reversed the charges to my dad. And my dad would have fixed it. He would have rescued me. Or you could get your mum to drive to the station and pay for your ticket at the other end. But you don't know phone numbers anymore. You don't have... I mean, I could actually have phoned my mum in Kidderminster. I still know that number off by heart. And I do actually know my wife's mobile off by heart. But I don't even know if you can make reverse charge phone calls anymore. Do they still exist? I have no idea. Now, thankfully, I had £15 in the pocket of these trousers because, well, not to go into too much detail, it was on the kitchen worktop when I came down to have my breakfast this morning, and it was definitely mine. So I just slipped it into my pocket. So I could actually get from Ealing Broadway to Tottenham Court. But first of all, you have to go and speak to a human being. You can't use cash. So Ealing Broadway, thankfully, is a ticket that still has staffed ticket booths, probably because of the Elizabeth line. I know some of this detail won't be relevant to you if you're listening in Widnes or Kuala Lumpur, but the point stands, and I'll get to it eventually, I promise. I always do, even on the days when you think I never will. I interact with a human being. There's various different options. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to spot a few people for a few quid when I get to this end. Chris Moyles, actually, I bumped into Chris Moyles on the way and he's lent me 20 quid, so I'm fine, I can get home. But it suddenly occurred to me that if you actually find yourself, and it's more likely to be as a consequence of crime than of incompetence, as it was in my part, and also that break of my normal routine. So my normal routine would involve checking my pockets, tapping my phone, knowing my wallet's there. But because I was being driven to the station this morning, rather than doing it in all the usual ways, my normal routine went out of the window. Do you know, you can't even buy a coffee here at LBC Towers with cash. I had to ask someone to... I said, if I give you £1.20, will you buy me a double espresso on your card? Because they won't take cash over the counter. I mean, just the whole world. If you've lost your phone and your bank cards, the whole world is against you. It's like a sort of... It's a bit like the Truman Show, but in a negative way. They're sending these constant obstacles for you to overcome. So I suddenly realised... I do not sound like Susan Hall, Andy. This was entirely my own fault. I was not a victim of any crime whatsoever, mythical or otherwise. And so what happens? Because you can't, Kate in Cornwall's been in touch already to say, try finding a phone box. And she's right. So if you find yourself unexpectedly phoneless and cardless, and you don't have any cash, this is a crucial point, because if I hadn't had that 15 quid in my pocket, I would have had to get in a black cab to Leicester Square without telling him, unless it was one of those happy occasions where they recognise me. But most people can't take that risk or hope for that outcome. And then tell him when we got here, I'm just going to have to pop inside and get the money now. And then I'd have to find someone who had like 60, 70 quid cash on them. So that, I mean, tricky. You've got no card and you've got no phone, and you are in you're far from home or from the office, What do you do? What do you actually... Well, I beg your pardon. What did you do? That's the topic, you see. I told you I'd get there in the end. What did you do? Because if I hadn't had that 15 quid in my pocket, what the heck would I have done? And it is that expensive. I got the Elizabeth line to Tottenham Court Road, £14.70 return. So I've got 30p. But if I hadn't had that 15 quid in my pocket... So in the 21st century hellscape, wherever you are, and remember, this is a big city, so there's probably more but what do you actually do if you haven't got your phone and you haven't got a bank card? And it's a world where, I mean, when's the last time you saw a functioning phone box? What do? Do you ask a stranger to borrow their mobile? I was at that point until I remembered the 15 quid in my pocket. I thought, I'm going to have to ask a stranger. And then I'm going through, have I been into any shops around here? And pulling the old showbiz thing. Has anyone ever said, oh, I love your show? Oh, there's that bloke in Mossbros. There's a bloke in Mossbros who said he loves my show when I went in looking for a... Oh, Christ, Mossbros doesn't open until 9 o'clock. I've got to be at work. So you've got all these mental gymnastics that you're going through. And I've got that very small added bonus of being vaguely recognisable. You don't have that. What do you do? What do you actually do? 0345 6060 973. I was stuck in Cambridge once, but my mum went to Kidderminster Station and paid for my ticket at that end. And then they issued the ticket to me at this end. But I had to be able to phone my mum. And what if you don't know any numbers off by heart? I did a quick roundup in the office. Everyone knows their childhood landline number, but do you know your mum's mobile number off by heart? How often do you speak to her? Every day, but you don't know her number off by heart. If you lost your phone and it had her number in it, how would you contact her? You see what I mean? 0345 6060 973. I have a 19-year-old colleague. He's looking at me as if I'm speaking Mandarin at the moment. But that's the point. The world has changed, yeah, man. The world has turned. You don't understand the burdens that my generation carry. What do you do? And that is why that initial moment of absolute panic is why I thought that I wouldn't be very good on Celebrity Hunted. But once the initial panic has passed and I thought I don't have to be, if I didn't have to be at work, I think I probably could have pulled it off. And thank you to Josh, who points out, James, you've got 30p. That's enough to feed a family for a week. It is in Newark. So 16 after 12 is the time. What did you do? What can you do? What do you do? 0345 6060 973. And who got more stuck than me? What's the most stuck you've ever been? You're standing there, because I had that little moment of, I'm going to miss work and I'm not going to be able to phone work to tell them that I'm going to miss work. What am I going to do? Yeah. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 90 minutes after 12. I don't want to turn into one of those old fogies who says things like, oh, well, the technology is supposed to make life easier, but it's actually made things more complicated. We've all been there. We've all been at a self-checkout till in the supermarket and thought, God, life was much easier when you could actually deal with a human being. But if you find yourself without all of your means of paying for things, then what can you do? Alex says, this is my top anxiety dream. Consequently, I've taught my daughter a song I made up of my mobile number. I'd started doing this when she was 3. She's 11 now and can still sing it. It's a small way of knowing that she has a hope in hell of getting in touch with me if she's stuck in the real world without a phone. But then she'd have to but then you'd have to go up to some. Actually, one of my children was on a bus that broke down. It was her first bus trip on her own in preparation for going to big school, and it broke down and she didn't have a phone. We were waiting for her at the other end. She went into a bookshop. It's another good reason why bookshops, and asked if she could use the phone to ring us. So you can do it. But Kay tells us all the phones in our local phone boxes have been replaced by defibrillator units. I'm not going to fall into that trap, Kay. I'm not going to start slagging off defibrillator units and end up in tomorrow's Daily Mail. I'm a big fan of defibrillator units. But what do you do in 2024 if you have neither phone nor bank card? And you're far from home, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Steve's in Walthamstow. Steve, what have you got?
Oh, hello. Hi.
Hi, Steve.
Hello?
Hello, Steve.
Hi.
What have you got?
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. I had a very, very interesting afternoon on Friday. I'm someone who I'm a handy person, and I was basically doing some decorating and also clearing some wood. So I rented something called a zip van, which you need your phone to actually operate, basically, to open it and shut it.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, so basically, while I was loading all this wood in the van, I very stupidly hooked my jacket up on the gate, but I was going past it all the time. But of course, I went into the house, came out, jacket gone. So my phone, cards... Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Hello?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay,
Steve just
anyway,
swore.
So
Steve, I'm just going to put you on pause for a minute and talk to everyone else. So this is a bit of a risk, this topic, right? I just want you to be aware of the fact that I take these risks on your behalf, okay? We just had to dump Steve because he swore. We're going to give him another go, but this is why you don't get nice things, you see. This could be the last big risk of 2024, and it's only the 8th day. Back to Steve. So anyway, they nicked your lovely jacket, and that meant you had no phone, no cards, and an open zip van.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Anyway, so I was able to do one trip in the van to take stuff away. I came back, and then basically the van went out to time.
And now the phone line's gone. Now that
hello. Can you hear me?
No, I can't. This is it. Right, I'm sticking with it. It's 23 after 12. Verdict so far. Should have talked about parking tickets. Sarah's in Guildford. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I did this. I drove 20 miles to do some shopping. I got there and I had nothing. No card, no phone, all at home. So what I did...
Yeah, but you've got a car?
Yeah, I've got a car.
Well, crikey, this is a completely different proposition. I was on foot. I had nothing.
Okay, but by that time, I was on foot.
Yeah, but you could have gone back to your car and got in it.
Yes, and then what? Driven 20 miles home?
Yes.
And then gone 20... No.
All right, carry on.
No, I wasn't going to do that. I was thinking of the environment. So I marched into a branch of my bank and I said, I am who I am and I can prove it and I want £500.
How did you prove it? How did you prove it?
Well, they ask your name, they ask your address, they ask for the registered telephone number they have for you. They ask you of any regular direct debits that only...
And this was at 8 o'clock in the morning, was it?
Oh, no, not at 8 o'clock.
Well, there you go, you see. There you go. I've got to get to work. I'm on the radio at 10 o'clock. And they gave... So you give them name, address, phone number, over the counter, and they'll give you... But I don't even know what my bank is because it's an internet bank.
Oh,
what branch do you go into if you've got a first... I could go to a Santander. What time do they open, Sarah?
I don't know. I don't bank with Santander.
You're the expert.
Yeah, but not with Santander.
But
listen,
I am listening.
I thought this was a safe subject. I listened to your.
You heard him swear if you were on hold, did you?
I did. I thought that was very bad.
It was. No, I know. No excuse. I'm glad his jacket got nicked. The potty-mouthed little time waster.
Yes,
honestly,
I know.
Outrageous behaviour. But anyway, your advice is no good to me because it was 8 o'clock in the morning. And listen, it's not about me. It's about the 1.3 million people waiting for me to start speaking. It's them that would be the real losers.
Yes, it would be, and we wouldn't like it if you were.
They'd have to get Nick Ferrari to hang on for a bit longer. There'd be uproar in the aisles. There'd be a revolution in the. So, what do you do? What do you actually do? And Sarah, with respect, you had a car, so you could have driven somewhere. You could have driven to a friend's. You could have done so. Joe's in Birmingham. Joe, what happened?
Well, this is a story going back when I was at university, which about 15 years ago now.
Yeah, that counts.
I was on the way back. I was on the way back from a 6-hour coach journey from Canterbury to Birmingham, and I was absolutely exhausted. And I had, back in the day where I didn't have phone contract, it was one of those pay-as-you-go type scenarios, and I had a huge suitcase. I was more or less in tears and just wanted to be home.
But that was your fault, though, that you'd run out of credit on your phone.
Yeah, but as a poor student, I've not got a huge amount of I didn't have a huge amount of money.
No, I know, but these are not sort of. It's not like the gods have conspired against you, is it? It's this poor forward planning. But anyway, what did you do?
So I ended up going to a phone box. I had no cash on me, but I had a stroke of genius, and I thought, hang on a minute, I've got one of those little trolley keyring token things.
What?
And I thought, well, that's the same size as a pound coin, right?
Oh,
the things that you put into a trolley. So I thought, well, this might work. So I put it into the phone box, and it registered it as a pound, and I was able to use that to call my dad.
And Dad to the rescue. So that involves a working phone box, and you had a sort of fake quid in your pocket. So again, this is not nothing.
To answer your question, what would I do in today's world? I'd probably just walk home and give up.
Yeah, but I can't walk from Ealing to Leicester Square in time to be on air at 10. Well, maybe I could. How long would that take to? Anyway, I digress. Thank you. No one yet has suffered as violently and as viciously as I do. And the bank's open about 9:30, so that's no good. That's no good, is it? 0345 6060 973. What can you do? What do you do in the modern world? So we're going to wipe out the phone boxes now. There are no phone boxes. That was 15 years ago. There are no phone boxes. Is there any public phones anywhere? Lots of places don't take cash, so even if you've got... Anyway, Martin's in Bristol. Martin, what have you got?
Hi, James. I love the show. So
pressure's on, Martin. This is not going well, mate, so it's all on you now.
Okay, well, leave it with me, no worries. So what it was, I was having a bit of a change of career. I live in Bristol, and I decided to do a painting and decorating course in Dartford, which is miles away. So Monday morning, it was about 8 o'clock. I was ready to provide the first day of my course, and I left my digs, and I threw my bag, my digs keys, my wallet, and my phone, and my car key into my car, which somehow managed to lock itself.
Right, so you've got nothing. You could have broken the window, though.
Well,
see, this is how my brain works. I'm always finding solutions straight away.
That was the first thing I was going to do, obviously. I mean, there was no one in the street. It was raining, and I was actually looking around people's gardens, trying to find like a rock or a garden gnome or whatever to smash the window with.
That would have been a better story, no offence. But if you'd smashed the window with a garden gnome, you'd have gone straight to the top of the class.
Oh,
so what happened?
So what happened, mercifully, there was a lady on her mobile phone in the car on the drive that I noticed. I went up to her and said, look, I'm really sorry, but I've locked myself out of my car. I couldn't remember my wife's telephone number, but I could remember the landline. Mercifully, she was in. I've got AA cover with Lloyds
How many
Bank.
people remember their landline number, though?
Well, I can't.
People don't have one anymore because it's all about the internet, isn't it? I haven't had a landline.
This is it. Yeah, so happenstance, I had a landline. I remember the number. My wife was in, so she was able to put me in touch with Lloyds Bank. I explained the situation. I had AA cover, so...
I don't think anyone really appreciates the depth of the hole I was in. All of you people had you're in very minor indentations. I was in a deep, deep hole. Oh. So you knew your landline number. I suppose going up to a stranger and asking to use their phone, that's the thing. But even then, what are you going to do? Come back? Well done, though. Not everyone's taking this seriously. Niall says you could have sold your body. Mate, I've got 30p already. And Jason says you could have hitchhiked. Apparently it's a 2-hour walk from where I was to where I needed to be. So if I'd set out immediately, I could have got here with minutes to spare. But I'd have been freezing cold and in a state of high dud. And everyone would be ringing me to find out where I was, and my wife would be answering the phone saying, I don't know. I dropped him off 2 hours ago. No one knows where he is. And I thought he'd be at work by now. He could be, crikey, he'd be introducing... It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. If you are in London, you may have seen some buses. The sentence isn't finished. All right, don't worry. You may have seen some buses with my face on the side. There's some rather nice buses advertising LBC, and some of them feature me and Nick and Sheila and Andrew, I think, is it? Anyway, I'm definitely there. I don't really notice anyone else. So would that work? Could you say to a bus driver, that's me, come here. Well, first of all, you're not going to get a bus. Do you think bus drivers know what adverts they're carrying on the side of their bus? I've had a message off a family member of someone working on the production team. He turned the radio on about 10 minutes ago and said, I've got no idea what you guys are talking about this hour. I've set myself the challenge of getting to 1 o'clock without him knowing. So this is niche radio. You're in the in crowd. You know what we're talking about. If you're just tuned in, you've got no idea what we're talking about at the moment. Could you use the fact that your face is on the side of a bus as proof of identity to get a free bus ride? Apparently, you can tell bus drivers that you are unable to pay, and someone has told me they're duty-bound to drive you, but I've heard loads of stories of bus drivers refusing to let people on if they haven't got the fare. So, in the 21st century, in a world without phone boxes, if you've got nothing on you and you're a long way from where you need to be, what can you do? Got no, and I might, this is the best case ever for getting a smartwatch, isn't it? I've never thought of that. I've never fancied one before. I wear quite a nice old-fashioned watch, a clockwork watch. It's all right. It's got a battery. I don't have to wind it up, but it's not waterproof. It's quite nice. It's simple, and I really like it. And I've always resisted the urge to get a smartwatch, but this is a pretty good reason to get it, because if you've got a smartwatch, you're never going to be where I found myself this morning, the situation that I found myself in this morning. And I don't know. I don't know the car. Lots of you have had it with car related issues. You've locked yourself out of the car. I wouldn't be panicking as much if I'd locked myself out of the car. It's not quite the same. You are alone. You're alone in the world with nothing in your pockets. That's the point. You don't have a car. You're not. If you've got a car, whether you've got the key for it or not, you're not alone in the world. You're alone in the world with nothing in your pockets, and you're miles away from where you need to be. What do you do? 0345 6060 973. Bus drivers do have a duty of care, so they could give a promise to pay. Yeah, but would they? Hello, I'm terribly sorry. I've come to work by mistake. Too much with Nell and I. What can you do? 12:36 is the time. Yasmin's in Leicester. Yasmin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I found myself in Leicester city centre with nothing.
Why? How? What happened?
Well, you know how you change your trousers and your wallet was in the wrong one? Women change handbags.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Okay.
I changed a handbag and got dropped off at the city centre, thinking everything's fine. Realised that I've got nothing in it.
Did you have a deadline? Did you have to be somewhere by a certain time?
I didn't have to be somewhere.
No, you see, no one has suffered like I suffered, Yasmin. No, dramatic's the word. Traumatic, actually.
It's being stranded with no phone, no money, no card, no nothing.
Go on then.
And I have not used a phone box in donkey's years, but Leicester City Centre has been recently regenerated. The High Street had got a modern phone box on it. So I thought back in the old days you could reverse charges.
Well, how long ago is this? When did this happen to you?
This happened last year.
And you rang the operator and said, can I have a reverse charge?
No. I went to the phone box thinking, like the old days, I'd do reverse charges, ring my husband, ask him to pick me up, and went to the phone box. It had instructions, lift the handset, dial, blah, 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 which I did. And I got a phone call for free. I was able to ring my husband, tell him what had happened and where I was so he could come pick me up.
Did you get a phone call for free?
For free.
Why did you get a phone call for free?
Leicester City Centre. I've no idea. These newfangled phone boxes. I don't know if London has them. I don't know if it's a Leicester City.
If we don't, I will be holding Sadiq Khan's feet to the fire next time he's in the studio. What the hell has Leicester got? So you just pick up a phone and you get one free phone call?
Yeah, I got a free phone call.
Okay.
I was able to ring home.
Again,
landline. Yeah. I didn't remember my husband's mobile number, but I have a home phone. I have a landline purely because my mom couldn't remember any numbers.
Fair enough.
And found it difficult to ring mobile numbers. So she rang landline to landline when she was like, God bless her.
I'm beginning to... No, I get it. So, well done.
But nobody else has a landline.
No, I know.
My children don't have a landline.
So if you didn't have who would you have rung? And you're lucky someone picked up, really. But what would...
very lucky.
So very
lucky we still have a landline. And I've resisted the temptation to get rid of the landline. But a lot of my friends and all my family, they got rid of their landlines.
What would I have done? I would have had to either ask someone to use their mobile phone and try and get my wife to come back, or I'd have had to convince someone to let me travel for free. That's not necessarily celebrity hunted territory. Andrew's been in touch. He says, did you consider parkour? You know what parkour is? That's that cool kind of urban sport where you jump off bus shelters and swing off lampposts, free running, I think you might know it as. I've been doing that all weekend, Andrew. My knees are shot to pieces. I don't know if I could have launched another round of parkour on the occasion. 12:39 is the time. John points out that I would surely be carrying one of my signed books with me, and I could perhaps have sold that. Mate, no one wants a signed one anymore. It's the unsigned ones. I've told you before, the unsigned ones are going for absolute king's ransoms at the moment. But no, I didn't have that. And I'm not being melodramatic, Ewan, in rural Scotland. Well, I take your point if you are in rural Scotland. But it's interesting that you cannot conceive of this if you're my age. Because when you were young, there would always be means and ways. Anyway, I don't know why so many people are ringing me. The quality of call so far has been very mediocre. But we shall press on, more in hope than expectation. Fanny's in Cheltenham. Fanny, what would you like to say?
I was going to say, well, I've got a story to tell you, but I was going to say I suppose we should recognise just for one small moment that there are some people in London especially who live every day like that, but not to put a downer on things.
Well, no, they don't live every day like that. I mean, I respect your kind of social conscience, but they don't accidentally end up in the middle of nowhere with nothing in their pockets. They might be on their uppers, and we on this programme are very careful and responsible to acknowledge that plight and that existence, but they would not find themselves a 3-hour walk from where they needed to be with nothing in their pockets.
No.
Yeah.
So, well, I was in Townsville in Australia.
Yeah.
And it was quite a few years ago. It was before we had mobile phones. And I was going on a trip there for a week to have some fun and some beers. I was on my year travelling.
Very nice.
And I took $20 out of the ATM before, because you didn't do credit cards, you just had cash, before getting onto the ferry. Got on the ferry, got to the other end, and I realised I'd left my card in the machine.
Oh.
So that's all I had for a week.
$20.
And I was on my own.
Right.
I didn't know anybody. I was on the other side of the world. So I thought...
you could have had money wired to you, could have you?
No. No. I mean, I'm only there... I was there for like 5 days. Wired to where? Back in there, I don't even think there was a bank on Magnetic Island.
No, OK. This is good. Carry on.
So I thought I'm going to have to get some money somehow. So I was in a bar, and there were a group of rowdy... I do believe they were mainly German men, tourists.
Yes.
Who were behaving... They were rowdy.
Rowdy.
And some of them were burping and doing all this kind of thing. So because I have a particular talent in that area, I challenged them to a burping competition.
Right.
And we started having this competition, and of course I knew I was going to win.
I can't ask you to. It's already gone downhill, this phone-in show. I can't ask you to demonstrate your burp. I'd like to, but I feel I'm probably going to get in trouble.
No, I'm not going to do that. It's many years ago.
You've put those childish things behind you, Fanny.
I want to hold on to my dignity as much as possible.
Okay, how much did you make?
I made over $200.
I mean, surely once you've burped once, you're a ringer and they know what's happening, or was it all on the table in one go?
I didn't do it all on the same night.
Oh, I see. You came back.
I came back for more.
And that saw you over the week. That's strong. And that got you back to the mainland. And then
what else was I supposed to do?
I don't know. I couldn't do that. I mean, this is supposed to be things that I could have done. I can hardly find a group of rowdy Germans and challenge them to a burping competition, which I wouldn't win anyway.
You might have some other secret talent that you're not quite aware of.
I've got 3 nipples. I suppose I could have a bet on...
There you are.
I could say, 10 quid says I've got more nipples than you.
There you are.
Could backfire, of course.
It could. You could do a pin the tail on the nipple or something.
It wouldn't work, though.
You just don't know until you try.
I don't know that. Thank you, and well done. If you get back in training, Fanny, you never know. You could still scale some dizzy heights. Esther in Bournemouth makes an excellent point. She says, I can't get rid of my landline, James, because then I'd never be able to find my mobile phone, because I use the landline to ring it whenever I've lost my mobile phone in the house. And I can't use a watch unless it's near my phone. Can I? Well, can I or not? Well, which one does? Which one? If I've got an Apple phone... Does that need the phone to be an Apple Watch? Does that need to be near the phone to work? Yeah, so I've given out false information then. So if I had a smartwatch, it would not be saving me from the fact that I'd left my phone at home, would I? It'd just be adding to my frustration and trauma, because I'd be thinking, can't pay for my ticket with a watch. Anyway, I mean, happily, I was a very brave soldier, and I got through it all. But I still don't know what you do. What if I was in the countryside by accident and you have nothing in your pockets? What do you actually do? It's 12:45. It is 12:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think going back to that post office conversation that we had in the first hour, I think Ed Davies probably got bigger problems from the current crop of prominent politicians than anybody else. And the Tories obviously have had 14 years to fix some of these problems. Nigel Farage inevitably is trying to bring Keir Starmer into it by pointing out that Keir Starmer was director of public prosecutions for some of the relevant period, which rather demonstrates the fact that he is neither across the story nor even has watched the actual programme. Because one thing you learn from that drama is that the Post Office prosecute their own cases. The CPS had absolutely no say whatsoever over the prosecution of sub-postmasters, but possibly I'm doing Farage a disservice. Maybe he's not being ignorant. Maybe he does know and just doesn't care. But Ed Davies got a problem here, I think, and indeed sort of other Liberal Democrats as well, who continued really to just parrot the post office line. So that's not going anywhere. You can use some Apple Watches to pay if you've got your cards loaded on them. You can use them to pay. So that is a good reason to do it. And even on the really top of the range ones, you can even make phone calls from them if you haven't got your phone with you. So it's not just a satellite of your phone, it's a self-contained item of technology. I quite like this. This isn't signed, and perhaps you'll be able to work out why. I was once arrested erroneously. Yeah. Everyone's erroneously. I was released without charge, but they'd taken me to a police station miles away from where I lived. And when they let me go, they just turfed me out, and I had nothing. I got to the end of the road before thinking to myself, hang on, I'm 14. Surely this isn't allowed. So I went back into the station and made the case that they had a duty of care, and then they begrudgingly drove me home. I've no idea how I would have got back otherwise. And then Google Pay on a watch doesn't need the phone. So it's all there. 12:50 is the time. Kerry's in Crowthorne. Kerry, what would you like to say?
So this was a situation with my parents who are in their mid-80s. They flew over with me to Ravenna in Italy to watch me run a marathon.
Crikey.
They decided to stay on an extra day. So I flew back to London. They decided they'd go on a nostalgic train trip over to the coast. I can't remember. I think it's somewhere near Rimini.
Oh, yeah.
So they got on the train, and I think during the journey, my father realised that he no longer had his wallet in his pocket. So that contained all his money, because he's so old-fashioned, he still carries around a lot of cash.
Right.
And his cards, fortunately not his passport.
Okay.
So,
it's not quite as tough as I had it in Ealing Broadway this morning, Kerry.
Well, no, I think it was
Central London. Central London, in a country that I speak the language of. I don't think your parents were suffering at all in these difficult circumstances.
Well,
anyway, carry on.
Absolutely no Italian bar. Obviously, get me a beer, get me a coffee. You know, that was the limit of it. But my mother said to my father, what are we going to do? I need the loo. He got to the other end, got off the train. He didn't even have a penny for her to go. I don't know if it cost a penny. Had no money to be able to go to the toilet. So my poor mother said to me, I just had to crouch behind the platform.
Oh.
But every day, 80s. Get back on the train and go back to Ravenna, whereby they enlisted the help of local policemen. But, of course, they were in Ravenna. They don't speak very much English there in particular. And so I called when I got the message when I landed in London, and was very fortunate because I got hold of the woman who I had rented the Airbnb from. And out of the kindness of her heart, she said she would go immediately to pick up my parents from the station with €100, of which, of course, you know, my father's going to pay back. But how trusting, how lovely of somebody, a complete stranger. So rescued them, picked them up, and took them back to their Airbnb.
And without that, and also without you, you know, it's sort
without me.
What would they have? What would have happened if they'd had no? I mean, they'd have had to. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often. My friend's dad, who's a similar age to your parents, went for a jog in Barcelona. He's very fit. You'd like him. You could run marathons together.
Yeah.
And he got lost. And he didn't speak any Spanish. And he was missing for hours. They were really worried. They called the police and everything. And then he just sort of turned up again. He came around the corner and recognised the bit of street. He's quite ditzy, if that's a correct word to use. He just got lost for hours. Everyone was panicking except him. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often.
I know. Well, I think, I'm not saying in Italy, because of course happens everywhere, but he had no, couldn't remember anyone going to his pocket. And my mother continually goes on at him because he's old-fashioned, puts it in his back pocket of his trousers. Apart from when they said when they were getting on the train, this really nice couple helped them get on the train.
Oh, well, there it is.
That's exactly what it would have
there
been.
Has he learned his lesson, or does he still keep his money in his back pocket?
No, he still keeps it in his back pocket.
There you go.
Because habits die hard.
They do. Indeed, they do. Thank you, Kerry. Cecilia is in Cobham. Cecilia, what's your story?
So my story takes place in another country as well. So my mum and I had gone to Athens just for a few days.
Yes.
And we'd had dinner in like the main market square, which was very busy. And then
yes.
Monastraki, I think it was.
Oh, Monastiraki, okay. Yes,
yeah.
Very, very busy.
Yes. And so it came to probably about 11 o'clock at night. We decided it was time to go home. And the first port of call for us was a cab. I actually have a disability, which means I can't walk very long distances comfortably.
Yeah.
So, cab was the first option, really the most sensible option. Unfortunately, we could not get a cab for love nor money. We stood probably for about 45 minutes trying Ubers, trying to flag one down. And both of our phones were very low on battery.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, so we were thinking, we have no idea how we're going to get home. Eventually, we were looking on maps, looking at where our apartment was, and we thought that maybe if we took it slowly, we could walk. So we decided that we didn't really have any other option than to walk, obviously with my mum's support, and going very slowly. It was sort of a last-ditch resort.
Oh.
Yeah, so we're walking and we're walking and we're walking, and I'm sure you've been to Athens before. How I describe it to other people is that it's a very beautiful city, but it's got pockets of areas that are not so nice.
Yeah, like everywhere, really.
Like everywhere, exactly. And so I had probably about 10% on my phone left. I had the apartment in my maps, and we were walking, and it was sort of getting quieter and quieter as we went away from the very busy public areas. And we just kept walking, and eventually we were like, this doesn't seem right. It seems like we've gone too far, we're walking too far. I will mention as well, I had awful blisters on my feet.
We're going to run out of time, Cecilia. We're going to have to hurry
anyway. So eventually we were completely lost. My phone then died. We were both panicked in the middle of nowhere, didn't speak the language. It was nighttime. We ran into a cafe that had some old locals there, and we managed to get into the cafe, and we said we don't know what we're doing. He couldn't understand us because we don't speak Greek very well. Luckily, because my father is Greek, I knew one word, which is after dinner do, which is car. So we managed to communicate to him that we needed a car, we needed a cab. And thankfully, one of his friends that was sat in the shop with him was actually a taxi driver. And so,
and he drove you back to the apartment.
Yeah.
Probably the most relieved you've felt in a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, I know how you felt. Thank you, Cecilia. Coming up to 12:57. This one caught my eye. Because this sounds, I don't know if you've watched The Tourist. Don't spoil it for me. I watched the first series. I haven't watched the second series yet because I'm watching the new Harlan Coben thing with Michelle Keegan. Have you watched that yet on Netflix? Flipping heck, it's good. Are you watching that?
I binged it all.
If you've done, Fogarty's inhaled the whole thing already. But this one made me think of that. So, 1993, I was 20 years old, backpacking around Australia, James. I answered an advert to help build a fence on a farm. I was instructed to tell the coach driver to let me off at a crossroads by a creek. Then to walk a mile down to the entrance where there was a walkie-talkie to call the farm to be picked up. The bus was delayed and I ended up being dropped off at night. I got off the bus, walked around to the back to get my bag, but the bus drove off. I shouted and waved, but he disappeared with my backpack. Then I realised my wallet, passport and instructions to find the farm were in the pocket of my backpack. My heart sank as the reality of the situation sank in. After the first minute, I screamed and shouted, and then I cried. Finally, I realised that I had to do something. Now, this is what I was like in Ealing Broadway this morning. Finally, somebody has got an experience that stands comparison with my nightmare, my Monday morning nightmare. I remembered the message about walking down the... Except you've got an escape route. I had no escape route. I was just stranded in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world, where the lingua franca is a language I speak quite well. I remember the message about walking down the road to the farm, so I had two options. Luckily, I picked the right road. I found the farm entrance, but the walkie-talkie was flat. I remembered that on my Game Boy, when the battery was flat, if you rubbed them together with vigour for a few seconds, you got a few more minutes game time. So I did this with the walkie-talkie batteries, got about 20 seconds, managed to contact the farmer. They came to pick me up. And because my mother had always taught me to put the address I was travelling to on my luggage, along with a phone number, I got my bag back a week later. And that is a really good story, actually, that almost has the beginnings of a box set on it, doesn't it? Almost has the beginnings of a drama series. Is it as good as it looks? So I'm four...
Oh, have you not even started
yet? I'm four... What, are you talking about the Harlan Coben one? Or
Fool Me Once.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
She's great, isn't she?
She is good, and they're all good in it.
No spoil. No,
I won't give you any spoilers.
casting. Harlan comes in whenever he's in town. It's a pal of mine. That's not a name drop. I'll introduce you next time he's here. But the casting on all of the shows that they've done for Netflix has been phenomenal.
Yeah, it stands out. And I'm not going to, obviously I won't spoil it, but it's almost... You can't spoil it because there are I've never genuinely never watched anything with so many twists and turns.
King of the twist.
King of the twist and turn.
King of the twist. And the new book, it's got Myron Bolitar and Wynn in it again as well, who are his best ever creations.
I haven't read his books. I must.
I'd lend you the lot. Sheila's up next. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen. She's doing an hour on her favourite television drama serials. You can listen back to the whole show on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Loads of podcasts there, all LBC shows to catch up on. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tomorrow at 10, I'll be telling you how I got home today. That's another hour, I reckon, don't you? Tom Swarbrick with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
I watched it till 2 a.m. Sunday morning.
Is that good?
How ridiculous is that?
Yeah. Is that good?
Every episode, I just had to keep going. 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 Episode, I just had to keep going.